Hello, and welcome to In the Roud. Greetings and salutations, dear listeners. My name is Matt Quinn, and this is In the Roud, a folk song podcast. Join me as we travel through the world of traditional folk song, one song per episode in the order they appear in the Roud Index. Each episode will feature two guests, one providing an historical look at the song, while the other will be a singer from the folk music scene to talk about their own version of the song. We're almost to the end of Season 3 now. This is Episode 9. This week we're looking at the song labelled Roud 29, which is Child Ballad number 18, Sir Lionel, aka Bold Sir Rylas. Later on we'll hear from our singer guest John Wilks, but for now let's have a look at the history with regular In the Roud contributor Brian Peters. Well, hello, Brian Peters. How lovely to have you back.
Yes, hello again, Matt. It seems like only yesterday we were talking about the bonny banks of Fordy.
Indeed, it was actually a fair while ago because we did that quite a way in advance,
Right.
didn't we? It was we're recording this on the 1st of April, and we recorded that one on the 7th of March. It was quite a while ago, but I was away for quite a lot of the second half of March, so I had to record quite a lot of things more in advance than usual, which felt a bit weird but necessary. But we've both been hard at work, haven't we? Locked in our respective recording studios.
Yeah, well, I know you've just been telling me about what you've been doing with Culver. I was in the studio last week working on a solo album, but since I'm here as expert rather than singer, I'm not going to talk about that.
Sure. Well, I look forward to hearing that. It's a long time since you've done a solo album, I think, isn't it? So,
Oh, yeah, it's good. 10 years.
backed by public demand, I'm sure. Well, anyway, it's good that we've both been hard at work on stuff.
Yeah.
We're here today, though. We're fast approaching the end of this season. We got this and one more to do. We've come to Roud 29, which is Child Ballad number 18, sequential from last week. Last week was Child 17 with Hind Horn, and here we are, Child 18, and the title, as people know, because the title of this episode, we've gone with Sir Lionel, aka Bold Sir Rylas. Now, Sir Lionel is effectively the sort of, in quotes, master title that Child sort of picked, wasn't it?
Yes, it's typical Child, as he called his ballad Edward because of a title in the Percy manuscript, but despite the fact that none of the versions that anybody's sung ever since have been called Edward, and Riddle's wisely expounded what kind of a title was that for number one. So it was Sir Lionel, but the thing is, because Child called it Sir Lionel, then collectors who came afterwards sometimes called it Sir Lionel as well. So we have to get that name in there somewhere, even though it's a bit of a random one.
Indeed. And then, as I'm sure I will talk about with John Wilks later on, Bold Sir Rylas is, I think, the most commonly known title, mainly because of John Bowden and John Spires. John, I'm sort of about later, but John Bowden found the text in, I think, Folk Songs of the Upper Thames, I think, or at least Alfred Williams' collection, and put a tune to it. And that's become very popular and widespread because of how popular they are as a duo. So I think, in terms of sort of public knowledge of this song, it's that, and then other versions of it from revival singers, but it doesn't get called Sir Lionel much. So
No.
just had to get that out of the way as an explanation of the episode title, I think. But so give us a sort of a rundown of kind of the general overview of the plot of this song. What are we dealing with?
Okay, well, as usual, there are variations on the theme, and you might find some versions which omit certain bits of the narrative. But overall, I'd say broadly the narrative is we have a brave knight who rides out into the woods, and there he comes upon, often anyway, he comes upon a woman who is in the high branches of a tree, although sometimes she's cowering at the bottom of a tree. And she tells him that she has sought refuge from a wild boar that is terrorizing everybody. And in many versions, he's killed her lord. So the knight then thinks, I'm going to come to the aid of the damsel in distress, and he coaxes the boar from its lair, often by blowing his horn. The boar charges at him, and he has a great battle with it, and he ends up killing it. Sometimes this battle is said to go on for hours or even days. But having killed the boar, it's common to quite a lot of versions of this ballad that then the owner of the boar emerges, and this is some kind of fearsome character who complains that the pet pig has been killed. What an outrage, and is understandably annoyed at having their pet stabbed by this knight. So there's then a second fight between the hero and the fearsome boar owner, at the end of which the villain is killed. So that's pretty much the story. We can go into all kinds of byways and rabbit burrows, of course, which is the pleasure of this this tirade of windbaggery that I'm about to unleash on you.
No, it's all good. This is a safe. I always say this is a safe space for folk song nerdery and all that sort of thing. So it's all good. So what's the kind of popularity of this song? Was it a widespreading song, or has this ended up being a more localized song? What's the reach of this?
Yeah, interesting point about localized, because in some ways it is very localized. It was not a terribly popular song. The spread of it was, and it did go across the Atlantic, but in some ways the spread was quite limited. So if we look at what Professor Child has in the English and Scottish popular ballads, you'll find 6 texts in there. Most of which are from England. This is the really unusual thing about this ballad. Child has only one text from Scotland, and as I've no doubt said before on these programs when dealing with songs from the Child collection, he tended to be very much biased towards Scotland because that's where all many of his best sources were. There's Sir Walter Scott and William Motherwell's and Peter Buchan and so on, but we have nothing here at all from those usual suspects. We just have one version from Scotland. And as I say, we have these various texts from England, which are from the same part of England as well. Several of them are from the English Midlands, particularly from a zealous antiquarian in Worcestershire who was found more than one version of this. And then looking at what happened after Child's Day, there seemed to be a number of others from that particular corner of England, but Cecil Sharp didn't find any versions of it in England at any rate, and Lucy Broadwood and all the other English usual suspects didn't find it. So it seems to have been localized in England. But as I said, it did cross the Atlantic, where it seems to have been primarily popular in the Appalachians, although there was one version from Vermont, which is obviously up in the northeast corner, so a long way from the Appalachian mountain country that we usually talk about in terms of those mountains. If we look at Bertrand Harris Bronson, traditional tunes of the Child Ballads, which again I always use as some kind of guide as to how popular and widespread it was, we have 17 versions in Bronson, and of course these are versions with tunes because that's what his book was focusing on. So only one of those coincides with the 6 texts in Child, and that's the Scottish one. But Bronson provides another 4 variants from England and 12 from the USA, of which 10 are from the Appalachian states, not necessarily from the mountain country. There's one from Missouri, but that was from somebody who'd heard it in Virginia. So again, back in that kind of mountain area, and the one from Vermont that I mentioned. So that's that's the spread of it, really. I haven't managed to find any from anywhere else. You usually talk about the count of the Roud index, which I must admit I've neglected to do. Have you looked at that in
I,
Roud?
yes, I have. I was just coming to that. Yeah, so the Roud Index, we've got 173 entries, but then, as we know, there's always duplicates. Pretty much every version has a duplicate, so it won't be 173. It'll be lower than that. And there's but then there's a further 15 entries in the Broadside Index as well.
Yeah.
And we've got some more titles in the Broadside Index because I'm sure you're going to come to Sir Eglamour today, and we've got Sir Eglamour, and we've got there we go. We've got there's the Broadside with one of those elongated titles that explains the whole thing.
Yeah.
You got one of them about Sir. You got the Sir Eglamour Broadside title.
Do you want to hear the whole thing?
Yeah, go for it. I love that. I love
Yeah,
it.
this is one from the English Broadside Ballad Archive in America. The one I've got here, which may be the same one that you have, is Courage Crowned with Conquest, or a brief relation how that valiant knight and heroic champion Sir Eglamour bravely fought with and manfully slew a terrible, huge, great, monstrous dragon. To a pleasant new
Hooray!
tune. So don't forget the pleasant new tune. So yeah, that's. I mean, this is arguable about whether this is even the same ballad, but yes, I have chosen to cover it to some extent. So, but what we don't have with this one, unless you are going to tell me otherwise, is dozens of different broadside printings from the 19th century, which, as I've said before on the podcast, is how many of these songs became really popular in the era when the collectors like Cecil Sharp and Broadwood and so on were going round England. They were picking up a lot of stuff that had been printed relatively recently on broadsides. For the most part, they weren't finding stuff like this old epic broadside that I've just read the title of.
Yeah, pretty much everything in these 15 entries in the Broadside Index are either titled Sir Eglamour or Courage Crowned with Conquest. I love alliteration. And in the Folksong Index, yeah, because you can sort these by country. And in Scotland, yeah, I mean, there's 4 entries, but they are basically the same one because it's one. So it's version B in Childs, and that's also in Christie's traditional ballad airs from 1876. It's in Bronson, and then it was in a 1930 issue of the Journal of the Folk Song Society. So that'll be the same one, and it's another name as well. It's Sir Isaac Abel and Hugh the Graham.
Yes, indeed. I mean, I'm glad you explained about the 4 different entries in the Roud Index, because it demonstrates exactly why there is so much duplication in the Roud Index. I'm not saying it's a fault with it, because he is trying to document every time that ballad was published, but it does mean that you've there already got a sort of a 4-fold increase in the count for Sir Isaac Abel and Hugh the Graham.
Yeah, just because Child did it once, therefore it's in Bronson once. The Journal of the Folk Song Society printed it, so it's there. That's 3. And then, Christie's traditional ballad. So actually, at least from Child, it's 3 times, and then
Christie's... Yeah, well, Christie was Child's source as well. So
there you go. Yeah,
that's a duplicate. So.
There you go. So 4, but it's only one version. And then, what does it say? It says 114 in the USA, and 28 in England as well. What do we got? We got things like Dixon and Bells, ballads and songs of the peasantry of England. For a song where the first line is, "There was an old man and sons he had 3."
Yeah, we'll be coming to that one.
Very good, and that's version E in Child. So that's Child and in Dixon and Bell's book. So that's 2 versions, same thing. Folk songs of the Upper Thames for Alfred Williams. That's the Bowden one. We'll talk about that later. And other ones: Folklore of Herefordshire, books of the British Ballads, Songs of the Midlands, and some more in other places. And there's entries in the Vaughan Williams Library and the Lucy Broadwood manuscripts and things.
Yeah, so we have that figure that you quoted is a vast overestimate of the number of individual discrete versions of the ballad.
Oh yes, absolutely.
those of us who are experienced with the Roud index know that and factor it in when we do the when we do.
Indeed. But it is I think Vic Gammon said it is a kind of a very, very loose generalization and a very loose sort of guide to how popular a song is in terms of, 173 for this, but obviously that there's lots of duplicates. But if you just compare the 173 here to the nearly 2,000 Barbara Allen entries, that it does give you a vague indication of the sort of popularity and widespread. But on a specifics level, it's not great.
No, I mean, I would guess that you've probably got 30 or 40 actual individual versions, just at a rough guess.
That sounds likely. And then, you can, other ways going through the index, that's 93 books, 32 sound recordings, so that's pretty good. 20 in manuscript, 15 in journals, 4 in newspapers, 3 in broadsides, 1 songster, and 1 video as well. Wonder what the video is.
Yes, I know about the video. We're coming to that too.
Boona Hicks, that's right. Yeah. Good stuff. So there's it's although it's not it's not tiny, but it's also not massive amount of versions, and you've got a good variety of sources in terms of the format: books, sound recordings, journals, broadsides, that sort of thing. So it's a nice sort of smattering of stuff. So, how far back can we take this? What's the earliest date or year we can put to this?
Okay, so it depends what you're looking at here. I think as a ballad, we can definitely take it back into the 17th century, bearing in mind that there are quite possibly 2 different ballads that kind of overlap involved here. But as we will see, if we take it back to the original story as opposed to the ballad, then we can take it back a lot further than that, because the original story comes from one of these medieval romances, which I've seen dated to 1350. I'm not sure how reliable that is, but there were definitely versions of that circulating in the 1400s. So it's old, but you'll have heard will have heard David Atkinson talking about Hindhorn, which again is based on this really old romance, but the ballad itself that we know as Hindhorn does not correspond with that. It's like Shakespeare borrowing plots from Greek and Roman literature and all of that kind of thing. There's always borrowing of themes and plots.
So 17th century for this one, you said?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm going to talk about the medieval romance a little bit when I've gone through the ballad as Child knew it. I think that's where I'm going to start.
Sure. Okay, well, off you go.
Okay, so here are Child's texts, and the first is the Lionel, which was the one that he chose to give the ballad its generic name, and this comes from a very famous document called the Percy Folio manuscript,
yes.
Which was dated to before 1650. Thomas Percy was a clergyman and antiquarian who ended his life as a bishop, so he's often referred to as Bishop Percy, although at the time he was making ballad collections, he was not yet a bishop, so there's a bit of a sort of chronological mismatch there. But a lot of people call him Bishop Percy. He was responsible for a really, really important collection of ballads, which he published in 1765, called the Relics of Ancient English Poetry. And he had a number of sources for that. He sort of touted as his prime source was this rare manuscript that he'd found, and it's a great and rather bizarre tale of how he located the manuscript. He was from somewhere around Bridge North, that sort of area of Shropshire, and he was visiting some posh friends in a manor house in Shifnal, which is a small town or village in that area. And I like to imagine that they were having their pre-prandial glasses of sherry. And although I have made that bit up, of course, I'm just trying to set the scene. He noticed, this bit is true, that the maidservant was lighting the fire with these sheets of paper, and he happened to see out the corner of his eye that they were covered with text, and it was text that seemed to be arranged in a sort of poetic manner. So he immediately said, what are you putting onto that fire? Let me see it immediately. And he kind of stamped out the smouldering embers and realized that it was this potentially quite important manuscript. So he rescued it and he sent it to the binders, bearing in mind that by this time some of it had already been burnt and was missing or somewhat charred around the edges. So the binders he sent it to made a bit of a botched job of it as well, and they trimmed off some edges of pages that actually contained lines of text. And then I believe that Percy himself tore out some pages subsequently because he didn't like them. So it's a severely compromised document. And the other thing that you need to know about Thomas Percy, as Francis James Child knew very well, that he doctored his material extensively before publication. I think Child said that he powdered it and stuffed bits of cotton wool into the ballads. So that was, ostensibly at least, the basis of this famous collection, Relics of Ancient English Poetry, which many people believe inspired the whole kind of romantic movement of poetry and Walter Scott and so on. Child had a copy of Relics of Ancient English Poetry, and in his early days he was quite influenced by it, but as he got to understand some of Percy's editorial practices, he was desperate to get his hands on the original manuscript, or at least to have it published so that he could access the undoctored versions of these ballads. And finally, it was published, I think, round about the middle of the 19th century by Hales and Furnivall. The Percy family had been very reticent about letting go of this manuscript and letting anybody else see it. But Child finally got to see the unexpurgated versions. And as I say, it was probably from middle to early part of the 17th century, written in Middle English. Dialect experts have said it might be from the Midlands or from Lancashire. A lot of the content is really quite medieval in style. There are 7 Robin Hood ballads. There are a bunch of ballads about King Arthur and Sir Lancelot and Sir Gawain. In terms of folk song, there's a version of Little Musgrave and Lady Barnard. There's King John and the Bishop, which we know as King John and the Abbot of Canterbury. There's Glasgerian that Child included and was made by A.L. Lloyd into Jack O'Ryan. There's the ballad that Child called Edward that I've mentioned before, which is the Who Put the Blood on Thy Clothes, Son Come Tell to Me.
And also, I realised this when I did some research for some sleeve notes. I perform with my duo with George Sansom. I perform The Death of Andrew, which is Martin Carthy severely sort of piecing together a set of hold words. But we're pretty sure that came from the Percy Folio as well.
Right. Well, I sing Sir Aldingar, which is out of Child, but originally from the Folio.
Yeah.
And whether those things count as folk songs or not is highly debatable. I don't know if anybody ever really sang Sir Aldingar. There are 2 versions of it in Child, but they might just have been recitations or literary works. So anyway, I just wanted, because this is the first in the Roud series that has come from the Percy Folio manuscript, I just thought I'd get in a little description of it first. That was rabbit hole number 1. So shall I tell you about Sir Lionel now?
Please do, please do.
Okay, so this has refrains that we're going to be hearing about again. It's interspersed refrains with lines of narrative in the way that a number of Child ballads are, like Riddles Wisely Expounded with Lay the Bent to the Bonny Broom and so on. So this one has the first refrain, which is the second line, is Blow thy horn, good hunter. And then the 4th line is, As I am a gentle hunter, and those lines repeat. So it begins with this character called Sir Egrabell, and he doesn't really play any part of the story apart from the fact that he is begat or begotten. God, what's the word? Anyway, he has had sons, three sons, and Sir Lionel was one of these sons. So Sir Egrabell disappears from the story at that point. So Sir Lionel is out hunting, and he sees the body of a dead knight who's presumably been badly gored, and then he notices the woman in the tree, and she tells him that the wild boar has slain her fella. Bearing in mind that I did look up a bit about wild boars. I did see an account that the wild boar of the 15th century was a truly fearsome beast and stood 4 feet or more tall, and had tusks that were as sharp as razors. But then another account told me that the wild boar was actually extinct in England by that point. So to what extent that's a folk memory, I'm not entirely sure. But as we know, there are a number of old wild boar tales. There's King Arthur's tales include a wild boar. I think the Mabinogion has a fearsome wild boar as well. So there's a bit of a trope here about the fearsome wild boar, and how any good huntsman needs to battle a wild boar in order to sort of prove his manhood. So, unfortunately, when the Sir Lionel ballad, having reached the point where the hero promises to rescue the woman in the tree, then there's this whole section missing, which I presume is what went up in smoke in the house in Shifnal, or maybe it was one that the printers made a mess of. So then there's this lacuna, I think Child calls it, in the story, i.e. a bloody great hole, and... When we return to the story, it's clear that he has already fought the wild boar and then met a giant who is the wild boar's keeper. And the giant then demands some forfeits because he's killed the boar, obviously, and says, I demand your hawks, your leash. I'm not quite sure what the leash is, but it's in Middle English, so it might translate as something else. And, oh, by the way, I also want the little finger of your right hand. And Sir Lionel understandably says, well, sod that for a game of soldiers. You're not getting them. And so then there's another sort of rather confusing bit of the tale. But the giant says, right, you're going to have to fight me, but I'll give you 40 days to recover from the wounds you've sustained in the battle with the wild boar. But I'm going to keep your girlfriend, who hasn't appeared in the story before, but here she is now. I'm going to keep your girlfriend hostage to make sure that you come back after 40 days and fight me. So 40 days pass. Sir Lionel returns. There's a phrase that we're going to hear again in many of these versions. He puts his bugle to his mouth, and he blew his bugle still full south. So this is presumably to tell the giant, right, I'm ready, outside. Let's sort this out like men. And then I'm afraid the end of the ballad is missing as well. So again, that's charred and disappeared. Now, Bronson, in his commentary on the ballad, says he suspects that may never have been sung at all. So it's debatable, but there's definitely a link between the Sir Lionel ballad, as Bishop Percy knew it, and the ballads that followed.
Right, sure.
So we then get to Child 18b, which is the one that you mentioned, Isaac a Bell and Hugh the Graham, and this is from Christie's traditional ballad Airs. That means it's going to have a tune to it. And this was apparently taken from the singing of an old woman in Buckie in Banffshire in 1850, but it had already been in her family for 100 years by that point. So that's taking us back to 1750. We're not doing too badly there. It doesn't have any refrains about hunters or anything. It's got a nonsense refrain, hey, nine nanny, and then the fourth line refrain is, and the Norland flowers so bonny. I'm going to try and sing it in a minute. But there are these two brothers, Isaac and Hugh. Hugh the Graham references another old hero called Graham. So maybe that name has migrated in from somewhere else and doesn't really belong. They're both the sons of an unnamed knight, and in this version, a place called Tor Wood, T-O-R-E, has been terrorised by both a wild boar and a giant for the past 7 years. Graham rides into the wood, the boar attacks him, he wounds it first, stabs it in the side, and then he chops its head off. And then out comes the giant, fee, fi, fo, fum, where's my boar? And Graham says, oh, sorry, pal, I've killed it. So the giant challenges him, and now this is referring back to the Sir Lionel version. He gives him 30 days and 3 to recover from the wounds that the boar has given him. And then after 33 days, back comes Graham and he kills the giant. So this is where I attempt to sing the tune, which is also printed in Bronson's traditional tunes. It's the only one, as I say, that he had that corresponded with Child. And it's, how does it go? A knight had two sons of small fame, hey, nigh, nanny. Isaac a Bell and Hugh the Graham and the Norland flower spring bonny. So that's my best evidence of that.
Very good. Very, very good. Very good.
Yeah, well, thank you. I should also, you mentioned very briefly a book called Songs of the Midlands, which was published by Roy Palmer. And I bought that song book years ago because I don't consider Glossop to be the Midlands, but I still thought it might have some interesting stuff in it. And indeed, there was a version of this ballad set to that tune, but what Roy Palmer had done had set Child 18C, which I'm about to tell you about, to the Scottish tune for Child 18B. So, although Roy Palmer was a great scholar, he was also a compiler of books of songs that were to be sung. So, like me and you and all the rest of us, he wasn't averse to picking a tune from one version and sticking it onto another version. So that's why that tune is vaguely familiar to me. Okay, 18C, this is the one that Roy Palmer used, was called, another alternative name for this ballad, The Jovial Hunter of Bromsgrove.
And this is at least title wise. This is what we're coming to in the second half of this episode with John Wilks.
Okay, yes, that's right. I believe he does sing that one. I always find it a bit bizarre that such a sort of epic tale should be set in Bromsgrove. I've got nothing at all against Bromsgrove, but it's a bit like hearing the epic romance of Sir Lancelot of Rochdale or something. There's just a bit of a mismatch there. But The Jovial Hunter of Bromsgrove, Child got it from a wonderful book that I managed to find on our old friend, the Internet Archive, which I always recommend to people if they're looking for antiquarian books. This was called The British, Roman and Saxon Antiquities and Folklore of Worcestershire, and it was published in 1856 by somebody called Jabez Allies, as in like the Allies of World War II is how he spells it, so I presume that's how you pronounce it, who was an antiquarian born in Worcestershire in 1787, and he recalled hearing just a snatch of this ballad when he was a boy. As I say, he was born 1787, so we're looking at the late 18th century. And he remembered hearing, in Bromsgrove church's corpse does lie, why winded his horn the hunter? Because there was a wild boar nigh, and he was a jovial hunter. It was obviously quite a garbled memory of the story, so there was just that one verse. And he started researching locally and found a carpenter called Cole who remembered hearing an old man singing it, so he was kind of getting a bit warmer. He was on the trail, and the local legend was that Bromsgrove had once been covered in forest, and his informant told allies that the original name had been Boar's Grove, although that might be a little bit far-fetched. Anyway, there was this local legend that a wild boar had terrorized the neighborhood, and in the version that this chap Cole had managed to track down, the jovial hunter of Bromsgrove had encountered the wild woman or witch, and then blew his horn to the 4 points of the compass, killed the boar. The wild woman accused him of killing her pretty spotted pig, so he had to kill her. But again, this was just a series of fragments and a vaguely remembered story. But then Jabez allies struck gold, and he found a man who had taken down 15 stanzas from a chap called Benjamin Brown of Upper Wick of the parish of Bromsgrove, and he then went and visited this man himself and took it all down. So we have here quatrains, 4-line stanzas with the alternating refrain, wind well or wind well, because it's wind well thy horn, so it means basically blowing it. Wind well or wind well thy horn, good hunter. 4th line refrain, and he was a jovial hunter. And this is where we meet Sir Rylas for the first time. Again, it's the theme of a father with 2 or 3 sons. Sir Robert Bolton had 3 sons, and Sir Rylas was one of them. He finds the lady in a tree. The boar, she tells him, has killed her husband and 30 of his men. He blows his horn north, east, west, and south, and out comes the wild boar charging out of the forest. As the text has it very colourfully, he thrashed down the trees as he charged at Sir Rylas. So I love that line. And they fight for 4 hours. Sir Rylas cuts its head off. The wild woman comes out the forest. What have you done with my pretty spotted pig? And she then demands, this is again going back to the Sir Lionel story, some forfeits. She doesn't ask him to chop off his little finger, but she says, I want your horn, your hound, and your lady. And he says, no, it's not that for a game of soldiers. And he, a rhyme with the demand for the gay lady, he says, it's well, my sword and thy neck can agree, which is a great way of describing a beheading. So the wild woman flies at him, and she does injure him, but he splits her head in twain, and then, according to this version, which is, as I say, a very localized version, both the protagonists end up being buried in Bromsgrove Church with a portrait of the wild boar close by them. So that became Child C. It was also published by Robert Bell in Ancient Poems, Ballads and Songs of the Peasantry of England with one or two minor variations. But Allies, this Worcester antiquarian, found another version, which became Child D. That's from a fellow called Mr. Osmond from Hartlebury, which is nearby. It's all in the first person, so we don't have to describe Sir Robert Bolton's three sons, and she doesn't make any demands of him that he then refuses. But it's very much the same ballad. Allies speculates about the so-called picture of the boar in the church, remarking that a boar was a motif on a lot of medieval coats of arms. And he thinks that there was a boar on the coat of arms of the Stafford family in Bromsgrove Church, but it was nothing to do with Sir Robert Bolton. Child 18E, Robert Bell's Ancient Poems that I've just mentioned, he had a second version, which was sandwiched between Did You Hear the Fond Tale of the Sweet Nightingale on one side and A Begging We Will Go on the other side. And Bell reported it as a children's song from the north of England that was founded on the old ballad. Now, this is a recurring theme with me. I've talked about it with the Two Sisters and possibly even the Bonnie Banks of Fordy. A lot of these ballads seem to have been adapted for children. Sometimes the tunes were simplified into this kind of sing-song melody. So Robert Bolton had his refrain was, wind well lion, not wild well thy horn, it was wind well lion, good hunter. So again, are we referring back to Sir Lionel there? There was an old man's sons had three, a familiar opening, but then a friar being one of the three. So the friar seems to be the hero of this, a bit like Friar Tuck in Robin Hood's band. And he blows his horn, and this time he blows it in a slightly different order, east, west, north, and south. Out comes the boar, and then that's it. That's where the story finishes. The rest of it's missing. Child 18F, which I'm going to mention, it was only a single stanza, again from this chap Allies in Worcestershire, in Bromsgrove. Sir Racabello had three sons, Wind well thy horn, brave hunter. Sir Rylas was one of these, and he was a jovial hunter. So we meet Sir Rylas again, but those of us who are familiar with the work of Watson Carthy may notice that they repurposed Sir Racabello as their hero when they put their own version together.
That's right, and that's the version I think I'm most familiar with, having heard that version since it came out on their album in whenever it was, I've lost the date, in 1996 on the album Common Tongue.
God, was it that long ago?
Yeah, Martin said, he said it was a single verse found in Child, with the help of every version I could lay my hands on, a shoehorn and a great tune from a Hertfordshire woman called Kathleen Williams from a song called The Crabfish, and a great band, then this song is given full rein.
Yeah, well, that's great, but that again, that's an example of the way we in the revival reconstruct these ballads. But again, I feel that the revival version should be left for the second half of the program.
Indeed,
Strictly,
indeed,
I
yes, that's fair.
did want to mention Sir Racabello tonight, so that we'd know where Martin got that
Yeah,
from.
absolutely.
Charles head notes are always worth looking at, but there are no bunch of Scandinavian epic versions of this as there are with so many of his ballads. So he attempts to make sense out of the storyline from the different texts that he has. But importantly, he notes the similarities with this old 14th century romance of Sir Eglamour of Artois. And that's quite interesting, this romance. In it, this knight, Sir Eglamour, is set three tasks, and this might remind some of our listeners of Child 2, where the young woman is set the three impossible tasks. But he's set the tasks by the father of the woman he wishes to marry. Interestingly, there is a version of the whole of this romance in the Percy Folio manuscript, in addition to and independent of the Ballad of Sir Lionel that we've talked about. So we have the three impossible tasks that are set to this knight. If you remember Monty Python and the Holy Grail, you'll remember how the knights are set these awful tasks. And first of all, they have to locate a shrubbery, and then they are ordered, when you have found the shrubbery, you must cut down the mightiest tree in the forest with a herring.
A herring,
And,
exactly.
they knew what they were parodying. So this was an old medieval romantic tale with these ridiculous tasks. Sir Eglamour has to first hunt a stag in some otherworldly forest and then fight the giant that owns it. Task number 2, he has to kill the famous and fearsome wild boar of Sidon, which has already killed 40 men. Again, a bit of a resemblance to the ballad there. They fight for 3 days. And then he has to fight the giant that owns the boar. And I like this. This is a classic piece of hubris. He says, right, I'm not going to be called Sir Eglamour anymore. I've renamed myself Sir Adventurous, which is the kind of thing Donald Trump might do. And then the king's daughter, I know this is a digression, but she gives him a magic ring saying this will protect you against being killed, which is exactly what happens in the ballad Kemp Owen, when there are all these tokens that are given to protect him against the monster. So that was task 2, was the boar. Task 3 is to kill a dragon, which is terrorizing Rome. And interestingly, before he goes to kill a dragon, he requests 12 weeks to recuperate, which is a common theme from the ballads. He goes off to lick his wounds for a while before he comes back to fight. And then lots more happens. So Sir Eglamour doesn't marry the King of Sidon's daughter. He marries somebody else. Their baby is carried off by a griffin, like happens so often. The baby returns many years later, and not recognizing his own mother, decides to marry her. But somehow it's all untangled and it ends happily. So, crazy, crazy stuff. It wasn't highly rated by critics of metrical romances. They all said it was very derivative and borrowed lots of themes from elsewhere, and it was a bit rubbish, really. But anyway, it was very, very popular at the time. There were many, half a dozen, I think, manuscript versions of it, and several printed versions of this great big long thing. I mean, we're talking about something that's many, many, many stanzas long. I don't know if it's even arranged in stanzas. It might be just this great block of text. So I thought I'd share with you Bert Lloyd's description of what happened to this metrical romance, because he's such a great writer. This is in the sleeve notes to an album by Roy Harris called Champions of Folly. Roy recorded this jovial hunter song. Bert wrote in the sleeve notes, "In the Middle Ages, a wild and shaggy folk tale of a monster-killing champion was turned into a courtly versified romance about a French knight, Sir Eglamour. Subsequently, this aristocratic piece was once again democratized and became a folk ballad." So that seems to have been exactly what happened in Bert Lloyd's colourful prose. Now, here we have to mention the other title that you dropped, Sir Eglamour. We know that the medieval romance is called Sir Eglamour of Artois, but then a ballad appeared that was actually called Sir Eglamour, but it's much contested about whether this was really related in any way to the Sir Lionel ballad. It definitely drew on the same manuscript tale.
Right, yeah.
Professor Child chose not to include it. Bronson did include it. It's hugely condensed from the romance. I did actually count well, I didn't count them myself. I got an estimate of the number of lines in the medieval romance. There are about 1,300 lines in it, which, if they were divided into quatrains, that would be 320 stanzas, which would be bloody long, even by Gordon Hall's standards.
Indeed, it would.
So this was first published in 1615 by a chap called Samuel Rowlands. The work was called The Melancholic Knight. Rowlands was a pretty obscure writer who wrote apparently about lower middle class life in round about the 1600s. And Bronson thinks he actually wrote these words himself based on the old metrical romance. So he has this introductory passage to tell you what he's about to set down. I turn and overturn again old books wherein the wormholes do remain, containing acts of ancient knights and squires that fought with dragons, spitting forth wild fires. The history unto you shall appear, even by myself, verbatim set down here. And then he gives you the text of this ballad called Sir Eglamour, which, as I say, he may well have written himself. There's no suggestion that they were to be sung, but it was Sir Eglamour, that valiant knight, he took up his sword and he went to fight. And as he roared o'er hill and dale, all armoured with a coat of mail, there leaped a dragon out of her den that had slain God knows how many men. But when she saw Sir Eglamour, that you had but heard her roar. Then the trees began to shake, horse did tremble, man did quake, the birds betook them all to peeping. Oh, 'twould have made one fall a weeping. Some might describe that as poor doggerel, but it did last. Then we go on. He goes on to describe how Sir Eglamour kills the dragon with his sword. The dragon flapped away with badly wounded and into a den, and so Sir Eglamour has won the fight. It's, as I say, it's pretty poor stuff. But the interesting thing is that this chap who's written it has picked on a slightly different episode in the old, enormously long metrical romance. He's taken the dragon task rather than the wild boar task. Okay, so it is distinct from the Sir Lionel and the wild boar.
Right.
But it did have a life of its own. A tune emerged in the latter part of the 17th century. It was obviously written around those words, but somebody had added a nonsense chorus to it. And it was published by Thomas Durfee in Pills to Purge Melancholy, which I'm sure is a work that we'll be hearing more about in this series if we haven't already. Durfee was basically a lowbrow song publisher and editor who was very much looked down upon by the literati of his day, but was very popular amongst the people. And to give you an idea of Durfee's work, one of his most popular entries was a song called The Fart, famous for its satirical humour in the reign of Queen Anne. So, that's the level.
Very good. I tell you what, one second.
Yes, go on.
I've got pills on my shelf. I'm just going to go and get it, and then I might just have a brief look at it. Do you know what volume it's in and what?
Well, the Sir Eglamour is in volume 3. I don't know which one the fart is in. If that's the one you were looking.
No, Sir Eglamour is what I wanted. Hang
volume 3.
Volume 3. Hang on.
Yeah. Well, while you're looking for it, I will also say that in terms of, again, the kind of folk songs that we're familiar with, Durfee published some of the slightly bawdier ones like Blow the Candle Out and Oh, John, No John. And he also published Over the Hills and Far Away and The Star of the County Down. But have you found it?
And there's a slight edit in the podcast while I've just grabbed my copy of Pills to Purge off the shelf, and it's titled A Song.
Right.
It's unhelpful, which I guess is why the Pills to Purge books are the contents is by alphabetically by first line of song rather than otherwise you'd have like several million entries in the contents labeled A Song, wouldn't you?
Yes, indeed.
But yeah, Sir Eglamour, that valiant knight, far la lanky down dilly. It's the lanky down
Yeah, well,
dilly
I'm
one.
about to try and sing it actually
Go on.
because he did print a tune with it.
That's you do a better job than I would probably. I could give
Well,
it a go, but it's you've had a time to think about this.
I have had a little practice at it. Yeah, I'm not sure that Durfee wrote this tune. I think somebody else did, but he incorporated it anyway, and it went. Sir Eglamour, that valiant knight, far la lanky down dilly, he took up his sword and he went to fight. Far la lanky down dilly, and as he rode up through hill and dale, all armoured with a coat of mail. Fa la 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 la, lanky down dilly.
That's very kind of. We had this thing on the Patreon when we did an episode on Green Broom, and one of the earliest Green Brooms is in Pills to Purge, and it's amazing how that tune, and in fact the tune you just sung, that could be something that someone would sing today. There's quite a lot of melodies in Pills that you just wouldn't sing nowadays, but that one actually sounds like something that might be sung on the revival.
Yeah, it does, except that the last Falau Lanky Down Dilly, which I kind of struggled a little bit over, it's all a bit uneven and asymmetrical. So if I was going to sing that, I'm not saying I would, but I would probably just doctor that last line a bit. I know that Kate Rusby has recorded that version, but I haven't checked to see what she did with it.
Right, sure, yeah.
Anyway, moving rapidly on, I started to look at some of the versions on the Vaughan Williams library archive, and I found that James Madison Carpenter had recorded a version of this. We've talked about Carpenter before and how he recorded things on his dictaphone, and they were all of very poor quality. There is a version there that sounds incredibly like that tune I've just attempted to sing to you. I think it's also, I think Reynard the Fox, our old friend, has put this up on YouTube, the Carpenter recording.
Oh, yeah.
Made in Pennsylvania around 1930. Similar lyrics to the ones that Durfee printed in the Pills. There are a few detailed differences, but basically, when I hear that, the tune is so similar that I think somebody in the US has at some point learnt that out of the book, Durfee or some reprint of it, because it's too similar to have gone down purely in oral tradition, because all the other American versions are so different from anything like that. There have been some oral variations. I think there may be a generation or two of oral tradition, but that's definitely derived from the book.
Sure, yeah.
So that is in Bronson. That is included in Bronson as the third of his 17 versions. He's a bit sniffy about this one. He says that apart from Child's A and B texts, all of the other ones are to some extent farcical, he says, although he does dangle the tasty morsel that maybe these nonsensical versions actually go back to some potential earlier traditional strain that Child hadn't found. But that's debatable. He's got a number of versions from the USA, which I'm going to talk about first, and they're mostly slightly farcical, as he says, or slightly nonsensical. The knight, who is the hero of the tale, has often become somebody called Old Bangham or similar. Bangham and the Boar is a generic name for this ballad in America. And he fights the boar. Quite often he fights it with a wooden sword for some reason. I've no idea where that came from. There's no sort of English analogue of the wooden sword. But I thought, again, I'm really risking it here. I'm going to try and sing you version number 8 from Bronson, which is actually from Richmond, Virginia, which is not up in the mountains. It's kind of more towards the coast. But it's from an African-American source originally, although it was collected from a white singer. And that's not the only version of this that seems to have had some African-American tradition. So this is Bangham and the Boar. So you might need to do an edit here if I don't get it right, but it's okay.
We'll see.
Old Bangham, will you hunt and ride? Dillum down, Dillum. Old Bangham, will you hunt and ride? Dillum down. Old Bangham, will you hunt and ride? Sword and pistol by your side. Cubby K, cuddle, cuddle dum, killy quo quam. I think that'll do. I'm not going to do a second take on that.
Sometimes these are a bit of a tongue twister. This lot with some of these refrain lines. I just noticed in version 6 you've got there's a wild boar in these woods. Uh, Turner quai quiddle quo quam and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, the kiddle quo quam is quite common. It almost sounds like some version of Cod Latin, although I'm not convinced that's where it comes from. But I wanted to sing that um, as a demonstration of the common form of the Bangham
Yeah,
strain of this tale. So the Dillum down Dillum is very common, and some version of Cubby K, Killy Quo Quam at the end is also very common. And you might well have noticed there's an echo of the frog went a courting, sword and pistol by your side. There
yeah,
may have been a bit of interchange between this and the Froggy ballad. But I want to draw our listeners' attention to the stanza structure because I know everybody's so interested in that kind of thing. The way this song tells its tale is we've got a line of narrative, Old Bang and Will You Hunt and Ride, line of nonsense, Dillum down Dillum. Then we repeat the first line of the narrative, Old Bang and Will You Hunt and Ride. Then there's a bit more nonsense, Dillum down. And then you repeat the same line again, but you add a bit more. Old Bang and Will You Hunt and Ride, sword and pistol by your side. So you've advanced the narrative a little bit. And then there's another load of nonsense at the end about Killy Co Quam. And we'll find that kind of narrative pattern in some versions of Frog Went a Courting, also some versions of Two Sisters. Two sisters walk by the river's brim, bow down, bow down. Two sisters walk by the river's brim, da 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 da. Sisters walk by the river brim, the eldest push the youngest in. You see where I'm going with that?
yeah,
It's this
absolutely.
rather laborious narrative, but also maybe it's the kind of thing that draws in the listener or makes people want to sing it because it's very easy to remember, I suppose. So I think that structure is quite important. It's a distinct structure from the old One Well I Horn Good Hunter version, which is a 4-line stanza. So that one that I've just attempted to sing a verse of is pretty typical of the various versions from America that Bronson has. We have a wild boar or sometimes a wild hog in the woods who's going to drink your blood, which you don't, I think, find in Sir Lionel. And then Bangham, having killed the boar, finds in his den the bones of 1,000 men. A number of them have the blowing of the horn, which, as we've already heard, goes back an awful long way. That goes back to Sir Lionel. The wild boar, in some of them, demolishes the trees as he charges along. We've heard that in the Jovial Hunter of Bromsgrove. Then Bangham kills the boar with this rather odd wooden knife. Occasionally there's a woman in the tree at the beginning, but by no means always. But then there's one strain in the US that's significantly different from the old Bangham tales, and this comes from a sort of extended family or a clan who were the Harmon Hicks clan. That's two separate names, the Harmons and the Hickses, who were very much intermarried and intertwined, and they came from Beech Mountain in North Carolina, Watauga County, and there were an awful lot of very important singers and storytellers from this community. They were visited by Frank and Ann Warner, the parents of Jeff Warner, who you and I know well, wonderful collectors of songs. They actually visited Beech Mountain in 1938 for the first time because they'd come across somebody who got an Appalachian dulcimer who told them he'd ordered this from this man called Nathan Hicks in Beech Mountain. So Frank Prophet wanted a dulcimer. he wrote to Nathan Hicks saying, please build me one. How much will I owe you? And they went down there to pick it up. And then they met these fantastic group of singers and musicians, including the very famous Frank Prophet, who was the source for the Ballad of Tom Dooley, which became a big hit. And they published this wonderful book, which I haven't included the name of in my notes. While I'm telling the listeners about it, can you just traditional American folk songs from the Frank and Ann Warner collection, I think is what it's called. It's just fantastic. And I happen to know through Jeff Warner that it's just been reprinted. And I will recommend this to everyone because not only does it include many great songs, not all from the Appalachians, some of them are from the woods up in the north east of the USA, and some are from the Outer Banks of North Carolina, which is a kind of maritime community. The songs are great. The descriptions of the singers and the communities and the context are fantastic, the kind of thing that the older collectors didn't really bother with. And there are brilliant photographs of these people as well. So that is to me, it's the kind of gold standard in what a book of folk songs from specific people and specific communities ought to look like. Have you come across that one, Matt?
Yeah, I haven't got it, but I've got the two CDs, the accompanying CDs.
Ah, of course.
That were available to buy separately.
Yeah.
It's one's called My Bonnie Lies Over the Ocean, I think.
Yeah.
And I can't remember what the other one's called.
Yeah, that's right.
But they're all the recordings that were made on those trips as well. Yeah, and really, I'm pretty sure that over the course of the podcast so far, I've played bits from those CDs.
Yeah, I'm sure you will. It's incredibly valuable material. So I recommend that book because, as I say, it's just been reprinted very, very recently. Unfortunately, Jeff Warner's brother Gerrit, who I also knew, died, I think, just before it came out, it was really his baby. He knew a lot about publishing, so he had really driven that. So I'm just going to give a little shout out to Gerrit Warner there. Right. Anyway, the Hicks family had come from England to Virginia in 1636. They kept good records of this. They moved to Beech Mountain in North Carolina in the late 1700s. They intermarried with this family called the Harmons, who were actually of German origin. Contrast this, we always hear about the fact that all the mountain communities and the Appalachians who sang all these old ballads were actually of Ulster Scots origins. Actually, a lot of them were not. Quite a lot of them were English, and this is one of the most important singing families of the lot. Many people will have heard of Jane Gentry, who was Cecil Sharp's best North Carolina source when he was collecting songs in 1916, 17 and 18. Jane Gentry's daughter, Maud Long, is somebody that you've played before on these podcasts because she was... Yeah. Yeah, so she was recorded. So again, she's connected with this Hicks family, although by that time they'd moved away from Beech Mountain. And they were also associated with a family called the Presnells. Lee Monroe Presnell, we played his version of the Two Sisters earlier on in the podcast series. And he was related to Buna Hicks, who is one of the traditional singers whose versions were recorded that I'm going to tell you about. But before I do that, several members of the Hicks and Harmon families at various times had versions of a song that they sometimes called the Jobel Hunter rather than the Jovial Hunter. It had got a bit corrupted. Interestingly, this often had the narrative, instead of blow your horn, good hunter, it was blow your horn, center. And we'll hear Buna Hicks sing that line, blow your horn, center, when we come to the traditional recordings. And this was a sort of family in-joke. Center was actually the name of one of the family members. And they just sort of spliced him into the ballad at some point in the family history of this ballad. So I found that quite amusing. I don't think I'm going to try and sing the Buna Hicks version because we're going to hear her doing it anyway. But the point about the Hicks family version is that it was quite archaic. So Abram Bailey had 3 sons. The youngest was called Center. He's gone to the greenwoods hunting, just like a Jobel hunter. So we're back in Bromsgrove, really, with this one, even though they're locating it in the Greenbrier Ridge rather than in Bromsgrove. Has a lot of resonance with the Bromsgrove versions. She says there's a wild boar in these woods. He's killed my lord and 40 men. Then a bit later, he blowed his horn north, east, west, and south, and the wild boar heard him in his den. But then you have a bit of local detail. As they crossed to the White Oak Mountain, on their way they went again. So that's a bit of local detail, I'm sure. I don't know where White Oak Mountain is, but they'd located it. They'd given it a bit of local interest. So the wild woman is here called the Old Witch Wife. They met the Old Witch Wife on a bridge. "Begone, you rogue! You've killed my pig." And then she demands three forfeits: your hawk, your hound, your gay lady. This refers straight back to the English versions. Here just to say a little bit, I know this is getting quite lengthy already, a little bit about the English versions. You mentioned one from Folk Songs and the Upper Thames that Spires and Bowden adapted. That was collected by Alfred Williams, who's a bit of an anomaly. He was, I think, pretty much the only one of the collectors of that great craze in Edwardian England who actually came from the working classes. He had worked at the Great Western Railway works at Swindon, and he collected loads of songs around Wiltshire, although sadly he didn't have the expertise to collect the tunes, so all we have from him is texts. He found a man called Daniel Morgan in Braden, which is just a few miles to the northwest of Swindon. And he is described, Daniel Morgan that is, as a traveller. But this is a great story, I had to put this in. According to Alfred Williams, Daniel Morgan was the great-grandson of a local squire, but the squire was so incensed by this chap's courtship of a gypsy woman that, first of all, he disinherited him, and then he decided he was going to shoot him. So he waited in ambush for Daniel Morgan for 3 days and nights with a loaded gun, and Daniel Morgan didn't turn up. So eventually, presumably, the squire got a bit cold and miserable and went home. Daniel Morgan survived. He married the gypsy woman that he loved and joined her community and travelled with them, and he dealt at markets and fairs. And Alfred Williams has a lovely little description of sitting with him in a cottage that he and his wife lived in the woods. And this man Morgan would sing as he whittled clothes pegs from withy, which is willow wood. So this is the first verse. There's no tune, as I say, because Alfred Williams didn't collect any, but here's his first stanza. Bold Sir Rylas, who we know from Bromsgrove. Yep. Bold Sir Rylas a hunting went, I and Dilly Dan. Bold Sir Rylas a hunting went, Killy Coco Ann. Bold Sir Rylas a hunting went, to kill some game was his intent. I and Dilly Dan, Killy Coco Ann. So what we have here is an amalgam. We have the stanza structure of the American Bangham versions, which, maybe not coincidentally, is also the stanza structure of Durfey's Sir Eglamour ballad, which is about the dragon, not the boar. But we have Bold Sir Rylas, the guy from Bromsgrove, is spliced into this version from Wiltshire with the Killy Coco Ann type of chorus. So they're all kind of mixed up with each other.
Wow,
I think this is fascinating, actually. It's one of these that I didn't know a lot about until I volunteered to do some analysis. Another English version collected by Ella Mary Leather, who's another really significant collector who did a lot around Herefordshire. So again, we're in the same corner of the country. We've had Worcestershire, a number of versions, one from Wiltshire, a couple from Herefordshire. So if you imagine the map of England, we're on the sort of western edge of the Cotswolds towards the Welsh border. All of these are from that area. This seems to have been where it was popular. Ella Mary Leather had one version that she called Dilly Dove or Dilly Doe. Dilly Doe, he went to plough, saw a maiden on a bough. So there's the woman up a tree again. And when he went to the wild boar's den, there were the bones of 40 men. Exactly the same, although it's not as 1,000 men. It's been slightly less exaggerated, but that's what you have in the American versions of Old Bangham. So I'm going to try and sing you a little bit of Dilly Dove because I know you've had requests from listeners to hear a little bit more about the tunes. So
Yep.
let me gather my wits about me. Here we go. Dilly-do, he went to plough with 2 horses and a plough. Colin Dame, come and go, Killy-co, come. Something like that. I mean, it's really not very inspiring, and
No, that's not. Yeah.
it's not one again I'm going to learn for my next album, but it's just interesting. It's been a lot simplified. It's still got all this Killy-co cum bit, but it's lost a lot of that repetitive structure that we have in many of the other ones with the nonsense chorus. And Ella Leather collected another version, which I'm not going to try and sing, but it's a much fuller version of the story. And there, the hero is called Brangywell. You know, is
Oh,
the
there's a Brangywell in Bronson, isn't there?
yes, that's the same one.
Number 5. Yes,
Yeah.
that's sorry. That is the one. Beg your pardon.
Yeah.
Yes.
So Brangywell gets us a little bit closer to Old Bangham. And I think there is an American version, though I haven't been able to find it in Bronson. I've seen it somewhere, which is he's called something like Bangry instead of Bangham. So I think there's a link there through the names.
Yeah.
There's one more version that Bronson prints, which is from Frank Kidson, though not in his own handwriting, so it may have been sent to him and just been part of his collection. And there's a very interesting article if people have got access to the old journals of the Folk Song Society. Anne Geddes Gilchrist, who was a great collector in Lancashire and the sort of resident guru on folk tunes for the society, she did a really interesting article based on Kidson's manuscript in 1936. And she, I think, like you, noted the similarities of many of the versions of this song from both sides of the Atlantic. So I come to a bit that there's a great sigh of relief now from the listeners because my next paragraph starts with the word conclusion question mark. I
Sure.
think, sorry, do you want to hit the conclusion mark? Did you want to interject?
I just wanted to say that I noticed something in the version you sang earlier, the Richmond, Virginia one, Old Bangham, because that doesn't have anything to do with jovial in it. The word jovial hunter normally turns up, doesn't it? And I assume jovial to mean quite good natured hunter. Is that the idea with jovial?
Well, I assume so. It doesn't. It's not the characteristic you'd normally associate with a hunter, unless you
So
think he's kind of so confident he goes about his boar killing business with a swagger and a smile.
indeed. So I was a bit curious about that. So there's not. So Old Bangham is not mentioned as being jovial, but we do get 2 mentions of the exclamation "By Jove"
Ah,
in that one. Verse 3, we get Old Bangham drew his wooden knife and swore by Jove he'd take his life. And
how
so I
interesting.
wonder if there's a connection between jovial and by Jove, or whether that's a coincidence.
Well, that's interesting. It's well spotted.
And then in the 6th verse, which I think is the final verse of that version, Old Bangham, did you win or lose? And all the nonsense bits. Old Bangham, did you win or lose? He swore by Jove he'd won the shoes.
Oh, yes, I did notice that. That was hilarious.
So on the shoes, but you got this by Jove thing, which seems oddly uncoincidental, considering some versions have the word jovial quite
Yeah,
prominently in it.
yeah.
So I wonder, maybe there's a whole article to be written about that.
Are you
If
are
anyone
you
can
going
be
to edit
bothered.
this bit out, or are you going to mention it?
I was going to mention that
Yeah.
in there. This is going in. This is
Oh,
going in.
sorry.
This is good. This is good.
Yes, I think it's good.
No, it's fine. Anyway,
Yeah, my conclusion really was pretty much going over the kind of thing you've been talking about. I think there are 2 distinct strains here. One is the blow your horn hunter or center, and that generally has more of the older characteristics. It's written in quatrains, and we have that from the Jovial Hunter of Bromsgrove and from the Hicks family. Then there's the other strain of it, which is the Dilly Dove version from Ella Mary Leather, or the Bangham bit, which is the one without the Jovial Hunter, except for the By Joves that you've mentioned.
yeah,
But it has the nonsense chorus and the stanza structure of the repeating lines which echo the Sir Eglamour ballad from Durfey. So I can't really untangle them all, but there's definitely some intertwining going on. And I do wonder whether the dragon version, Sir Eglamour, and the wild boar version at some point sort of hybridized. So you then get wild boar versions with the song structure of the dragon version. But
Mm.
that is speculation. And I think maybe we should get to the recommended recordings.
I think we should. So yeah, recommended listening as always on some field recordings. I know you mentioned before we started you had a half a dozen or so. What have you got for us?
Okay, well, the first one is one I've mentioned, which is Buna Hicks from that family. She's supposed to have learnt it actually from her husband. She was born Presnell, so she was the niece of Lee Monroe Presnell, who the great singer from that community. Um, there are several clips on YouTube, including one that has a video of her singing part of it. It was called Sir Lionel by Sandy Payton, who recorded her. So you have to look out. Some of those clips are called Sir Lionel as well. He recorded her in 1961, published on the Folk Legacy label, which was a really important American label of traditional singing and music. And she is singing the Hicks Harmon family version, or her own take on it anyway. You can I'm not going to give you the YouTube links now, obviously, but they're all there.
Yeah.
And there's another Hicks Harmon version from Samuel Harmon, which was recorded in 1939. So he's the previous generation. And he's singing Blow Your Horn, Sinner, as well, with that refrain line. But his is a bit different from Buna Hicks, but you can tell it's essentially the same version. And
Do you think there might have been some slight mishearing somewhere along the line in some religious context about blow your horn sinner, maybe?
it's the way they sing it. It could be that, but the family story is that there was this family member called Center, and I
Oh,
think
okay.
it's
All right.
it's just the pronunciation. They don't really pronounce the T.
Sure.
There is another Hicks version, which I think I only just found this morning. That's D. Hicks. He was in Tenchtown, Tennessee, but so I don't even know if he's part of the same family, but I suspect he was, and it's an interesting version because he's got quite a deep voice, a bit gruff. Now he's not singing about old Bangham as so many of these recordings are. He introduces it. There was a hunter in the green is his first stanza, but it is a very full version for an American version. It has the wild woman coming out of the woods and demanding the forfeits, and he splits her from the mouth to the chin, but it has the Dillam Down, Killico Quam refrains that we normally associate with the Bangham version, so rather than the Jovial Hunter one. So this is some kind of amalgam. Then, if we're going to the old Bangham and the Boar, we have Jean Ritchie accompanying herself on the dulcimer and with the Dillam Down, Dillam chorus. It's a beautiful version, of course, because it's Jean Ritchie. She's a beautiful singer. So there's another one from a J.D. Vowell of Harlan, Kentucky, recorded by Alan and Elizabeth Lomax in 1937, and that's an old Bangham version. And then there's one more that I will mention, which is from a guy called Bobby McMillan, who I never saw, that apparently he did visit England and do some folk clubs at one time. He calls his one The Witch Wife's Pig. And there's Ren on the Fox has started adding some really quite interesting notes to these videos, and he's suggesting that he might have got it partly from the Hicks family. But the tune is very, very distinct to Bobby McMillan, and he starts off by singing Egra Bell. He had three sons. Now, Sir Egra Bell is one of these old courtly, knightly names that we have in some old versions of the ballad. But as a caveat, Bobby McMillan was a bit like Gordon Hall. He had a collection of ballads and books and so on. So it's popular. It's possible that he put that together himself. It's worth listening to anyway. So I think that's probably enough, because I think you have one or two as well, don't you, Matt?
That's right. Yeah, I've just got two that I came across, both on releases by Musical Traditions, the record label, which you can download all the albums for £2 or £4, depending on how many discs there are. And yeah, someone who's been mentioned, I think, by you and me on a previous episode, both American versions. These Nimrod Workman. So I'm a big fan of. I've listened to the release by Musical Traditions called Mother Jones's Will, which is a whole album of recordings of Nimrod Workman, and Byler and the Boar is the one there.
Yeah, terrific singer.
Yeah, great stuff. And that's a four-line stanzas. Byler went to the wild boar's den, Quilo Quay. Byler went to the wild boar's den, there laid the skulls of 1,000 men, Quilo Quay, Quam, Quattle down.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
make of that what you will. And that's got some quite interesting. You got the wooden knife in there, swore he'd put an end to the wild boar's life. Here came the wild boar cutting out a slash, Quilo Quay. Here came the wild boar cutting out a slash, tearing down hickory, white oak, and ash. Quilo Quay, Quam, Quattle down.
Yeah, again, that's the thrashing down trees as he charged along, but they've localized it with presumably the trees that grow in that area. Fascinating.
Yeah. And so that's him on his own singing that, but there is on a different record label release from somewhere else, I've not been able to track it down, is a recording of him singing it in a duet with his daughter Phyllis.
Oh, yeah.
And I'd love to hear that at some point. But yeah, Nimrod Workman, and also a name I've come across quite a lot recently, but are not mentioned on the podcast much, is a woman, American woman called Eunice Yates McAlexander from Patrick County, Virginia, 1979 recording, and it's on the release Far in the Mountains, Volume 1. And Far in the Mountains, there's 5 volumes of Far in the Mountains released on Musical Traditions.
That Mike Yates collection, I think.
It's the Mike Yates collection as he went through America. The Appalachians, rather. 1970, volumes 1 and 2 is 1979 to 1983 recordings.
Mm.
In fact, they all are, and volumes 3 and 4 and 5 are in fact all the recordings from 1979 to 1983.
Yeah, relatively recent, but still getting some amazing stuff.
Absolutely, and it's a collection of songs and music as well. There's a lot of fiddle and banjo music in there.
Yeah.
And Eunice Yates McAlexander had the song Wild Hog in the Woods. There is a wild hog in the woods, diddle-o down, diddle-o day. There is a wild hog in the woods, diddle-o. There is a wild man, hog in the woods, kills a man and drinks his blood. Camo K, cut him down, kill him if you can.
Ah, kill him if you can, rather than kill a Quam. That's
Yeah,
interesting.
and then you've got wild hog. He comes through yonder's marsh. He splits his way through oak and ash, and then it's Bangham drew his wooden knife. So it's Bangham in that one, but the song's called Wild Hog in the Woods. They fought for 4 hours of the day, and then found the bones of 1,000 men. Yeah, so it's got bits and the verse stanza of the stanza length of some of those, but bits of the other ones, and as usual, the sort of a mixture of stuff.
Yeah.
I will play clips of definitely those two, and I'm sure I'll be able to find. I know Reynard the Fox on YouTube has some, so I'll.
Yeah. Don't miss Buna Hicks.
Buna Hicks.
Yeah, and D Hicks was pretty interesting.
That's right. We'll pinch some stuff from there and play the other two as well. So let's draw this to a close.
I think we really think we should. I promised windbaggery, and I have delivered.
You have delivered in spades, which was great. I'd much rather these went on a long time and the complaint be, it's gone on too long, rather than the complaint be, but you didn't talk about such and such a bit.
Yes.
So I'd rather this was a complete compendium rather than a sort of a slapdash, slightly sort of vague look at things. So I'd rather the complaint bit was too long. And this has gone on quite a while. So we'll finish here. It's really fascinating because I was only really aware of this song from the Waterson Carthy Rackabello, the bold Sir Rylas from Spires and Bowden, and the jovial Hunter at Bromsgrove that we're going to come to later with John Wilks. I wasn't aware of any of that history, so that's an education for me this morning as well.
Yeah, well, it was for me actually. A lot of it. I only knew really the Roy Harris version and the Waterson Carthy and Spires and Bowden, and I'm looking forward to hear what John Wilks does with it as well.
Great. So yeah, it's fascinating, and we'll come to him later. Thank you as always, Brian, for your time and your effort in this. It's very much appreciated.
Well, you know I love doing it, don't you?
Indeed. And I'm sure there are plans to have you back in the foreseeable future on the podcast and the Patreon side. So until then, Brian Peters, thank you very much.
Cheers, Matt. See ya.
A huge thanks again to Brian Peters for providing us with the history of Sir Lionel, aka Bold Sir Rylas. We're now at the halfway point in the episode, so we'll just take a few minutes and listen to a few different versions of the song sung by traditional singers. So what you're going to hear now is The Wild Boar from both Samuel Harmon and Buna Hicks, The Witch Wife's Pig from Bobby Macmillan, Byler and the Boar from Nimrod Workman, and Wild Hog in the Woods from Eunice Yates MacAlexander.
From Bailey he'd 3 sons, blow your horn center, and he is to the wild woods gone, just like a Jobel hunter. As he marched down the greenwood side, blow your horn center, a pretty girl, oh, there he spied, as he was the Jobel hunter.
He looked to the east, he looked to the west, blow your horn, center. He blowed his horn both east and west, just like a Jobel hunter. He met the witch wife on the bridge, blow your horn, center. They fit 3 hours by the day, if you were the Jobel hunter.
Agrah Bailey had 3 sons, Foladay, Foladay, Folladingstamadary, oh. Agrah Bailey had 3 sons, Willie was the youngest one, Foladay, Foladay, Folladingstamadary, oh. Oh, Willie would a hunting ride, Foladay, Foladay, Folladingstamadary, oh. Willie would a hunting ride, a sword and a pistol by his side, Foladay, Foladay, Folladingstamadary, oh.
Everybody went to the wild boar dam, Quilloquay. Body went to the wild boar dam, there lay the skull of 1,000 men, Quilloquay, Quay-Quan, quarter down, with the body made him wooden knife, Quilloquay. Body he made a wooden knife, sword put an end to the wild boar's life, Quilloquay, Quay-Quan, quarter down.
I sing There's a Wild Hog in the Woods, as my father used to sing it. There is a wild hog in the woods, diddle-o down, diddle-o day. There is a wild hog in the woods, diddle-o. There is a wild hog in the woods, kills a man and drinks his blood. Come, okay, cut him down, kill him if you can. I wish I could that wild hog see, diddle-o down, diddle-o day. I wish I could that wild hog see, diddle-o. I wish I could that wild hog see and see if you'd take a fight with me. Come, okay, cut him down, kill him if you can.
And you can find the links to those tracks in the episode notes. On to the second half of this episode. I sat down for a chat about this song and other things too with this week's singer guest, John Wilks. Well, hello and welcome to In the Roud, John Wilks. Hello.
Hi there, Matt. Thank you for having me.
Hi. Well, thank you for agreeing to do this. It's very, very nice of you to say yes when asked to be involved in this. Yourself being a seasoned folk podcaster yourself.
Yeah, all those years ago, it feels like now. But it seems like it's been handed on in some way to someone very capable. So there we go.
Yes, for people who don't know, you ran the old songs podcast, didn't you? For
I did for
2 years, I think, was it in the end?
roughly 2 years, and I think something like 20 episodes or something like that. Not dissimilar to what you're doing here. Um, but yes, I mean, yes, it was fun while it lasted. Let's just say that.
Let's just say that. Okay.
Actually, I'm not going to leave it at that. I'm going to say that it was fun, but it also slightly killed my love for traditional folk songs because you can only spend so much time doing them unless you're Matt Quinn, where it seems like you've got the whole of your next 30 or 40 years planned out. So good luck with that, Matt.
Well, we shall see. I guess one difference being that I guess you were doing a lot of the historical research, weren't you, for your one?
Yes, you've found a way yeah, you've found a way to get somebody else to do your homework, basically.
Well, that's basically it, isn't it? I've got someone else to do the work for me.
Yeah, I mean, it's very, very clever. I was trying to do it all, as is my want, and
Yeah.
and ended up getting thoroughly sick of it all.
Well, that's fair enough. I mean, yeah, I just think that. I mean, my very, very initial idea when I started this podcast was let's get Steve Roud doing the history of every song because it's his index, and he said no straight away. Yeah, but he did say it was his idea. He said there are people out there who have done the research already. Get them in.
Well, I can't. I mean, as I just said, 2 years was enough for me. I can't imagine being Steve Roud and having a whole lifetime of this stuff. But again, that seems to be what you're doing. So
I mean, he's been doing it since 1970
yeah,
now, and he's added. I spoke to him yesterday on the date of this recording. I spoke to him yesterday, and I got an update on the Roud number from him, the current Roud index tally. And the last time I got a tally from him was in the summer of 2024 at around 46,000 something or other. And now it's currently at 47,427. He's added 1,000 more songs in the last year.
is he just making them up? I mean, how is that possible? Like, I think
So he is currently. People will have heard this if you're Patreon listeners. You will have heard him talk about this on last week's Patreon episode. He came on and did a talk on broadsides and how they relate to the tradition for me, which was really good. And I'm going to release that episode as a bonus episode on the main podcast to round out season 3 in a couple of weeks. So everyone will hear this eventually.
cannot wait. Cannot wait.
I can't. It was great. I loved it. Steve said that, yeah, he's added 1,000 in the last year. When I spoke to him last summer, he was making his way through all of the Irish song collections.
Wow.
Because obviously I know, having mapped out the first 5 years of this podcast in terms of what the songs are, it is like 70% child ballads and the rest are English folk songs. So he's doing English songs. He started off doing English songs and the child ballads with a handful of other things. One of the earliest Patreon episodes I did was with Nancy Kerr on the song The Wee Weaver, and I got an Irish guy called John Malden in to do the history of that one, because it is an Irish song. He and I went through the first 400 Roud numbers, and we came up with 4 Irish songs. So Steve let the side down there, but nevertheless, that's because he was focusing on child and whatever piqued his interest, really.
I mean, I suppose if you've been doing it since 1970, then it really, and also if the whole thing is named after you, then it really is your life's work legacy, isn't it? So you're not going to just give it up in your 70s or whatever he is.
No. So he was going through the Irish collections. He's now going through a lot of the American song collections. And even if, there's a lot of songs he's come across that didn't have Roud numbers, but that's consequently, that's if he finds a song that doesn't have a Roud number now, and he gives it the next Roud number, which would be 47,428, by definition, really, that's the only entry for that number in the Roud index, because he's come across it and it's not already indexed. And so there's so many songs coming up that he's indexed that only have one entry, and no one's ever heard before or since.
Does he have any kind of like sort of letters after his name? Like, is he like a knight or anything? Is he Sir Steve Roud? He should be, shouldn't he?
Should be. Well, the EFDSS has just announced this new folk hero award scheme thing,
Okay.
and I think we should all bombard them with Steve Roud recommendations. I think he deserves this folk hero thing. I think what a legend.
Yeah, him or Martin Carthy,
Yeah, absolutely.
Shirley Collins.
Also, yeah, very. I mean, yeah, we could list off loads of people we think. But yeah, Steve is. Yeah, I mean, he's added 1,000 songs recently and still going strong. But I'll get there, or I won't get there really in terms of songs. I'll never get as far as that, unless someone picks the song for a Singer's Choice mini season on the Patreon.
I'll never say never.
Never say never. So, in terms of the main podcast, though, numerically in order, this is season 3 and round 29, which is a rather startling thought for me. I've been doing this since May of last year. Season 1 started in May of last year, and
Been doing well, haven't you? I mean, as you said, I managed in 2 years only 20 episodes.
oh, you were doing the one a month, weren't you?
I think I started off at like trying to do it one a week, then I realized the folly of my ways, and which you may well do eventually, and then I decided to go monthly, and then even less regular than that, and eventually just stopped altogether. I mean, there was a point where I was sort of like, even when you started, I was still thinking, well, the old songs podcast is not dead yet. Like, it's still got life in it, but I was in denial really, and now I have kind of accepted that it is no longer a part of my life,
Right.
and for that I'm relatively thankful.
Okay, well, that's fine. And I don't want to give up yet, at least. I'm thoroughly enjoying myself.
What I recommend is, if you want to maintain a love for the tradition and traditional music, don't try and start a website about it as well as a podcast, because that's a surefire way to kill any enthusiasm you have for any of it.
Right, of course, because you also created the Tradfolk website, didn't you, as well?
But I don't do that anymore either.
You handed that over to someone else as well.
Yeah. I mean, this is, as I was saying to you before we started recording, I think I'm effectively a kind of undiagnosed ADHD person who gets very, very interested and hyper focused on things for a chunk of time and then moves on and leaves it for dead, pretty much. And that's kind of how I feel about those projects.
And I've dragged you kicking and screaming back to a traditional folk song for this.
I mean, it's not, I should I should point out I do still sing traditional songs in my set, but it's not exclusive anymore. Whereas I went through a period where I really was like, zealous about it, and I only wanted to sing traditional songs, and that's not the case anymore. But yeah, I mean, it was interesting hearing this song again, or going back to this song, because it's not one that has remained in my set, and it was quite fun. It was like meeting an old friend. It was like meeting a really bizarre old friend.
Yeah, I'm sort of trying to do that a bit with who I get for singing guests. I mean, it's nice to have someone on who does sing that episode song in their current set, or it's on their album that's coming out soon, or it's on their most recent album, and it's in the front of their brain already. But it's quite nice to sort of sneakily go up to someone and say, there's a song you recorded on an album 12 years ago that I would love to have you on. I did that with Hazel Askew in season 1 for the Two Sisters, because that's on an Askew Sisters album from like 2009 or something. And I managed to get her to sort of bring it back. So I quite like the idea of people revisiting songs from a while back.
As you know, and some of your listeners may know, I spent quite a lot of 2023 and bits of 2024 on tour with Martin Carthy, and to keep myself entertained and to keep him relatively entertained, I played a little game whereby when we were backstage before gigs, I would be warming up on my guitar and I would play songs that were sort of like, as the kids say, deep cuts from the Martin Carthy back catalogue, to see if he would remember them. And quite often he would sort of look up at me with this sort of inquisitive face and sort of go, "What's that?" And I'd say, well, you recorded this in 1967. And then he'd instantly remember it and then correct me because I had the words wrong.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, this is a song you recorded called The Three Cripples. Do you remember this one? Which actually, despite the rather awful nature of the song, it's a great song. But nevertheless, we're not here to talk about The Three Cripples. I'm sure it's got a Roud number. We'll have to deal with that one if it ever turns up. But I remember because there's a fantastic video of the two of you backstage at a gig having a mess around with when first I came to Caledonia.
There's that one. There's a video out there of us doing that, and there's another one of me trying to. Oh, it was really sweet actually, because I'm going down a little bit of a tangent here, but what was, the thing about Martin Carthy for me is that, of course, he is this sort of. I read something the other day that called him the great oak of English folk song. So he is this kind of like towering figure in English folk song.
Yeah.
But for me as a guitarist, he's also incredibly influential in terms of what he did with the guitar and how he put or how he gave guitar geeks a way to experiment with and play traditional songs on the guitar. I mean, obviously, when Martin started playing traditional music, the playing of traditional songs on a guitar was relatively unheard of. I'm not saying it was completely unheard of, but it was relatively unheard of. You have stories of sort of Ewan McCall and people like that sort of not allowing people in with guitars. But it was Martin and some of his cohorts who did stuff with that. So when we were doing the tour together, I quite enjoyed playing some of his old arrangements, which he's long since stopped doing, whether it's he stopped enjoying playing those guitar arrangements, or maybe he's physically unable to anymore because, sort of age slows us down. And it was really delightful. And there's a really nice video somewhere of me playing Geordie or Georgie, I can't remember which one. It was the one that he recorded on Crown of Thorn.
Oh, is that the he never stole ox, he never stole ass, he never murdered any? That one, that's very good, yeah.
And the guitar figure to that is one of my favourite pieces of his, but he doesn't do it like that anymore. So when we were rehearsing, I started playing that, and he was, his eyes lit up, and it was like he'd just met an old friend. And then throughout the tour, I would sort of catch him backstage, and he was trying to teach himself how to play that again in that way. So there's this lovely video on YouTube of the two of us sitting there, and I'm sort of showing him how to do it, and he's sort of ticking me off, of course, when I'm being too flash, too cocky.
What a lovely man! Just don't call him a legend.
Well, I don't listen to him on that. I used to get. Am I allowed to swear on this podcast, Matt? I'm gonna.
Yeah, it's fine.
I used to get on stage and say, "Ladies and gentlemen, fucking legend Martin Carthy." Hear what he says.
Very good. I love it. There's one of the water. I mean, we'll come on to what we're talking about in this podcast in a minute. But one of my favourite things is one of the Waterson Carthy albums. They do the Copper Family song "Shepherds Arise," and in Martin's sleeve notes, he says, "We hate being referred to as the first family of folk.
Yeah.
As far as we're concerned, it's the Copper family."
Yeah.
And he's quite right. He's quite right, of course.
Yeah.
And I remember, chatting with him once. He was staying with my parents on the way to a gig somewhere. He'd just done a gig near us, and is staying with us. And we found an advert for his gig the next night, and it labelled him as the Godfather of folk. I thought, you're going to find, Paul Simon with we're going to wake up one morning to find creeping Jane's head in his bed or something, So, but it was this idea of the Godfather of folk is going to start ordering.
Oh yeah, there are some amazing ones. I'm not going to remember it now, but there was one when we were on tour where it had been written up somewhere. I can't remember what it was, but it made him out to be almost like some kind of mythical monster.
Something like
Leviathan of folk, or I don't know what it was.
Leviathan. Anyway, from Leviathans to dragons and wild boar, depending on which version. How's that for a segue, folks? How does he do it?
How does he do it? Why does he do it?
Why does he do it? Right, let's bring the conversation on to the topic of this week. But before we get on to the song, let's do a bit about you. For the listeners, give us a bit about yourself and your sort of musical upbringing, your history of folk music. Are you someone who knew about folk music as a child, or did you have folk music thrust upon you, as so many of us did? What's the story, John Wilks?
I am an imposter, really. I've like throughout my sort of involvement in traditional folk music, I've kind of felt like um, I'm somebody who is sort of standing on the sidelines cheering everybody else on. That's my main role in traditional folk music. And I also sing a bit occasionally, play a bit of guitar with it. But I don't feel that I do it nearly as well as most of the people that end up on your podcast. So I kind of think of myself um, as an imposter. I mean, ultimate imposter syndrome, right? But that's a whole story.
I mean, I feel that as well sometimes about certain aspects of things. And what am I doing? You know,
Yeah,
there's other people out there. What am I doing?
absolutely. Yes,
Yeah, you know.
well, yes, exactly that. I don't really know what my folk background is because it's quite vague. I've found out more about it as I've got older. But in short, my paternal grandparents were folkies, but my father hated it. And it turned out after my father had died about 10 years ago, and long since my grandparents had died, I started finding out more about it from my uncle. And it turned out that my grandfather had been a dancer for the Bows of London, which were, a very considerable Morris side
Wow, yeah.
in the 1940s and late 40s, early 50s. He would have been dancing for them. And the lovely thing about sort of the folk world and the folk community is that when I mentioned that on Facebook 3 years ago or something like that, within minutes, somebody had contacted the Bows of London archivist and found photos of my grandfather that none of my family knew existed. So
Oh, that's lovely.
it was lovely. What I remember is that my father didn't like it. He was brought up, like there are photos of my father at Thaxted as a child. He quite obviously was sort of, as you just said, had folk thrust upon him and it didn't fit with him. And so he took quite I was going to say a violent reaction to it. It wasn't violent, but he certainly didn't like it. And so during the time that I lived with my father, my parents divorced when I was 13, but during the time that we lived with my father, that sort of music would not have been in the house. But I do remember, I do have vague remembers and I do have vague memories of my grandmother playing the recorder and playing tunes on the recorder that only later in my life I realized were traditional folk tunes.
Right.
And so after my father died, I went on a bit of a sort of like sort of self-finding mission and ended up at Cecil Sharp House because it turned out that my grandparents had met at Cecil Sharp House.
Wow.
And so I went on a little bit of a fact-finding mission. And when I turned up at Cecil Sharp House for the first time, I heard this music. I think somebody was just rehearsing in one of the rehearsal rooms. And I heard some of these tunes, and it was like somebody had opened up a little box in my head and sort of like presented me with these memories that had been locked away of my grandmother playing this music. So it turns out, I mean, short version of that is I would not ever have called myself a folkie, but it turns out that I come from a family that had a relatively rich folk background. I mean, my grandparents divorced when they were in their 50s because my grandmother wanted to move somewhere closer to where they danced. What do they call it? Playford.
Right, yeah.
She was an avid Playford dancer, and my grandfather wasn't into the dancing so much, having hung up his bells, and she couldn't stand to be away from the Playford, so she divorced him and moved to Lichfield so that she could be closer to Playford. So
Blimey.
there you go. That's how folky my family were. But my upbringing musically was the Beatles, was Simon and Garfunkel, was Bob Dylan, Joni Mitchell.
Right.
And when my stepfather came to live with us, he brought with him I would have been early teenage years, and he brought with him the likes of Bert Jansch, John Renbourn, Fairport Convention, that kind of thing.
Yeah, of course.
And suddenly that music was allowed into our house, welcomed even. So yeah, that's how I got into folk music.
Very good. And yes, you and I have spoken at length about the Beatles, passions of ours.
We recorded one together, didn't we, in lockdown?
In lockdown. That was one of the first lockdown things I did. I think was you recorded yourself singing and playing Strawberry Fields Forever, and I spent a week like an idiot working out all of the organ and all the brass parts on my concertina.
I mean, I was so impressed with that. I was amazed that you were able to do that and that you managed to do that, because those concertina things, especially the one that you had that had a million buttons on it, are like sort of like mental Rubik's cubes, aren't they? They're the sort of things that I'm holding off for when I start to get senile and I need to exercise my brain.
Yeah, it's a bit of a headache in multiple senses of the word. But I also, so I had a lot of help with that from, I've got a book on my shelves over there, big thick white book, The Complete Beatles Scores.
Surely not the complete Beatles scores for concertina. Surely that doesn't exist.
No, it doesn't. I had to. I went because it's literally every single song the Beatles recorded, includes the covers, and it's the entire complete transcribed scores for every song, written out in proper stave notation and tablature for the guitar bits. And so I just typed the relevant bits I wanted for concertina into Sibelius, and then put them in one line, and then played it.
Oh, gosh. Well, I have to apologize to you. I saw it again the other day, that video. I played it ridiculously slow.
Oh, no, it sounded lovely at that
good.
speed. It was great at that speed because it gave me time to think about each bit before it turned up. So no, it was good fun. But I then did it in 3 takes, but it's all one long take with no edits. So it's a bit, I was sweating quite profusely for that one, getting it wrong. We're not here to talk about the Beatles, alas. We can do that another time. So when did so you're a guitarist as well? When did the guitar come into your life?
It's roughly around the same time as the Beatles did. So when I suppose I have a memory of hearing the Beatles in a car bit when I was being taken to like a Cubs evening or something like that. So I must have been about 8. No, younger than that, probably about 5 or 6, early 80s, and I was just mesmerized. I remember hearing "Please Please Me," and I remember being on the back seat of a car with all of these other noisy kids, and my ears and brain just zoomed into these harmonies, and I was like, "What the hell is that? What is going on there?" That's where my interests are, and sort of, within 6 months of that, I had a guitar and I was trying to learn how to play. So yeah, I think I was young. I was probably about 8 when I really got to grips with the guitar.
Right. And so you do and have done solo work, and you tour with Jackie Oates, don't you, as well? We had Jackie on the Patreon for the Wassail episode. We did
nice.
For the Gloucestershire Wassail.
Yeah.
So that stuff, and you did the tour with Martin Carthy, amongst other things. And this is a song that you performed solo, isn't it? This particular song.
Yes, it's a song that I recorded. I recorded it on an album that I made during lockdown, an album called Up the Cut, and that's when it sort of like existed in my repertoire, I suppose, about 5 years ago.
That's right. I've got a copy on my shelf and a handwritten note for you in a drawer somewhere.
Oh, very nice.
Saying thank you for buying this or something along those lines.
Well, thank you for buying it, Matt.
Oh, my pleasure. It's a very, very, very good album. When do you have a memory, not necessarily this version, The Jovial Hunter of Bromsgrove, but were you aware of this song already in any form or variant? Was this something that you were already aware of?
This is what I mean by being a bit of an imposter. So I started getting interested in traditional music, I suppose, when quite late in life. As I said, as a teenager, I was listening to the likes of Bert Jansch, Martin Carthy. I'd have been listening to. I certainly remember having his album when I was his debut album when I was like 17, which would have been in the mid 90s. And I was into all of that stuff. I don't think I was conscious at that time, though, that I was listening to what we would term as traditional music. To me, it was just songs. Like I probably thought that Scarborough Fair was written by Martin Carthy and that Paul Simon had had his wicked way with it or whatever.
Yeah.
Like I don't think I would have realized at that point that it was traditional music. And it was only quite late in life, in my, relatively speaking. So I was in my sort of mid to late 30s when I became particularly interested in traditional music. And I suppose by the time I was 40, I'm 48 now. So by the time I was 40, I was playing traditional sets fairly exclusively. Like all of my own stuff had gone out of the window, which is now not the case. It's kind of swing back into a sort of much more comfortable balance of sort of covers and traditional stuff and my own stuff. But so all of that means that I wasn't very aware of the whole scene of which you have grown up in and are part of, and sort of that community. I wasn't really aware of that until quite late on. I knew of the likes of Eliza Carthy because I was a fan of Martin, so I knew that she existed, and I remember Eliza from the 90s. I remember her, when they first started making a big deal of the fact that she was this punky kind of folky person. I remember that. But again,
Yeah.
from the outside, she was like, I wasn't into folk then. And so she was this person who was just, I think one of my friends had a poster of her on his wall or something like that at university. So that was my connection with that generation of folkies. And so the situation with this song, when we consider who recorded this song, which I think we're going to talk about later, none of those people had made an impression on me at the time that they recorded this song. So, I hadn't gone back by this point to the likes of Spires and Bowden. I wasn't aware that they had done it. I was barely even aware that they existed. I mean, I suppose I should mention Paul Sartin, like he was my neighbour, and
Yeah.
so I became. I got to know people like, members of Faustus and members of Bellowhead, as people that were friends of Paul's rather than as sort of significant musicians before I realized sort of the impact that they'd had on the traditional music scene,
Right. Sure.
roughly speaking. Because Paul was just a bloke who ran the local choir to me and a bloke who was always in the pub. Like he wasn't Paul Sartin of Bellowhead. And what was lovely about Paul is that to most people in Whitchurch, where I live in Hampshire, he wasn't Paul Sartin of Bellowhead there either. He was just Paul, the guy who teaches fiddle to some of our kids, that kind of thing. Like there was no sort of celebrity aspect to him, which was one of the lovely things about him.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think when I came to that song, I came to it because I was I had made in 2018, I made an album of traditional Birmingham songs that album was called Midlife. And then I wanted to follow that up with something that was a lot more stripped back. So Midlife was an album that was sort of made with a band kind of set up and that kind of thing. It was a highly produced album, but I wanted to do something that was much more in that kind of very stripped down sort of 70s guitar troubadour type thing. And I wanted to explore songs from the Midlands further. And so this song, Roud 29, came to me through that research, and it came to me through the Roy Palmer's book, The Songs of the Midlands. That's how I first came across it.
Ah, very good. Yes. Yeah, because I think as I mentioned earlier with Brian, my knowledge of this song stems initially from primarily from Spires and Bowden.
Yeah.
Because I'm at the right age where I was like 14, 15 when they started. So it was like, I still, John Bowden lives 15 minutes from me and I see him semi-regularly and he's a good friend. And he's like, in his late 40s, I think. But I, in my brain, he's still like the cool, hip, young folky who I look up to.
Yeah. Be careful what you're saying here, because I think John and I are pretty much exactly the same age. So,
well, you're a cool, hip, young folky as well, John. It's fine. There you go. But yeah, so I still in my mind see John as like the next big thing, even though
I think a lot of people do. Is I
Yeah.
think that's, certainly when you're thinking about sort of the sort of the revival generation who are now in their, late 70s, early 80s, quite a lot of them, to them, the likes of John Bowden and Eliza Carthy still are the new kids on the block.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was very much aware of the John Spires and John Bowden arrangement, and subsequently then realizing that that was the same song, or at least a variant of the song I had heard for years, sung by Martin Carthy with the band Waterson Carthy
Yeah.
on the album Common Tongue, with the song called Rackabello. And
Yeah.
so it turned out that I had known this song for a long time in one form or another. And so, yeah, but after that, I didn't know anyone had sung it. And so it turns out it's quite popular.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I do remember that on my 40th birthday, I went to Norma Fest. This would have been 2017, and so like at least 4 years before I found and recorded this song, and one of the headlining acts at that particular Norma Fest was the Furrow Collective, and they did sing their version of this song, which is "The Wild Hog in the Woods." So when I say I hadn't heard it before, I had heard it before. I had heard it by them, but I don't think I was aware. I mean, I don't think I was aware that there was even sort of a connection between that and until I did my research for my sleeve notes.
Sure, yeah. And to link that in with earlier, the Furrow Collective one that Alistair Roberts sings with them is the version that Eunice Yates Mac Alexander sang. We talked about her with Brian, and I played a clip of her in the mid-episode bit. So that's her version with the excellent refrain bits. That's the "There is a wild hog in the woods, diddle-o down, diddle-o day. There is a wild hog in the woods, diddle-o ooh. There is a wild hog in the woods, kills a man and drinks his blood. Come okay, come okay, cut him down, kill him if you can." So that's the version that actually has some actual English in it rather than sort of nonsense,
Gobbledygook.
which is quite nice sometimes. But
Yeah, it's a good song, isn't it? And I liked their version. I mean, I liked, again. I don't think at that point I was even particularly aware. You see, this is what I mean about how I went down a massive rabbit hole and just sort of taught myself as much as I possibly could about English traditional music. When I first saw the Furrow Collective, so when I was 48 years ago, I don't think I would even have been aware that what they were doing is quite clearly something that has come from the American tradition. To me, it would have just all been traditional folk music.
it sounded Scottish because Alistair Roberts is singing it.
Yeah. So he probably threw me off the scent anyway, but
Oh yeah, very good. And yeah, so Roy Palmer's book, Songs of the Midlands, which I do not own, I must rectify that at some point.
oh, it's very good.
He said in his book that it was collected in about 1845 from someone in Upper Wick in
Yes.
Worcestershire.
Yes, Benjamin Brown.
Benjamin Brown.
I remember this because I used to talk about it on stage. So Benjamin Brown, I think not much was known about him other than that he was illiterate and had learnt the song, in the traditional way by listening to somebody else sing it and then memorizing it. And he'd learnt it. So it was collected in 1845, and he had learnt the song 35 years previously. So we can say with reasonable confidence that Sir Rylas has been jovial in Bromsgrove since at least 1810.
Excellent. I've just looked it up in child version C. Here we go. The British, Roman, and Saxon Antiquities and Folklore of Worcestershire, second edition, page 116, from the recitation of Benjamin Brown of Upper Wick, about 1845. Ancient poems, also in Ancient Poems, Ballads and Songs of the Peasantry of England, edited by Robert Bell. And so that's the version that, is there. It's version C in child. That's the conclusion we got from that. On a bit of a tangent.
Well, there we go.
And did you do any editing to your version, or is this pretty much as is?
No, I think I must have done, because when I was listening to Brian talking in the beginning of this section, when he was talking about the Bromsgrovian version of the song, which makes me chuckle. I grew up just outside Bromsgrove, which is, well, not just outside, maybe a few miles away, which is why why, when you flick through these books, sometimes the titles jump out at you, don't they? And for a jovial hunter to have come from Bromsgrove, just didn't make a huge amount of sense. Although I do believe that roughly the story that takes place in this song depicts a typical Friday night out in Bromsgrove. So
Wild boars and women sitting in trees, and yeah.
yeah, I think yes, I've forgotten what your question was.
Did you do any editing?
Did I do did I do any editing? I think yes, when I was listening to Brian talking about it, I didn't recognize quite a lot of the stuff that he was reciting from the Benjamin Brown version of it. Like there were bits of it there that were clearly connected to what I sing. So I think it's a case of I would have done some editing in order to fit it into what I wanted to sing with it. I sometimes used to do that, chop stuff around a little bit when I just found it too much of a mouthful to get into the structure. I mean, I think the melody that I was using came from Palmer, so I think I was trying to work out how you fit some of those long and rambling lines to the melody that was written out in Palmer's book, and I couldn't make it work, so I fiddled with some of the lyrics, but without changing too much of the story, or without, I wasn't removing stuff particularly.
No, well, I think some of this is I'm actually just about managed to get them up on the same screen. The words for your version on Main Norfolk and the words of version C in Child up on the same screen. I'm trying to compare them just to see what's there. And I think
there was a verse that Brian read out that I don't sing, and I was trying to think back when I was listening to that yesterday. I was like, why don't I sing that anymore? And I literally think it's one of those things where at some point I played it and it just fell out of my mind.
yeah,
I don't think I consciously took any verses out. I think I just forgot that there was a verse there.
I think your version is 11 verses and there's 16 in the Child C. So
I clearly got quite a porous memory, because not only did I forget that there was that many verses, but also I've forgotten what I did with them.
that's fine though. It's all in the annals of time. And I noticed, you've cut well, not cut anything out, but you've, as usual, some of these much older songs, it's best to do a bit of editing just to, not modernize it is the wrong word, but at least get, sort of snip away at some of the more archaic language. Verse 3 in Child is, you've got, "Oh, what dost thou mean, fair lady?" And I think you just got rid of the word "dost."
What dost thou mean, fair lady? I do sing dust, so maybe it's just been written out
Okay,
wrong.
maybe, yeah.
Maybe I put dust back in. I don't know, but
I certainly would have got rid of the word "dost." I think.
I think what happened, Matt, is, let's face it, you can talk about this song is in as scholarly and serious fashion as you want, but at the end of the day, it's about a man who might have killed somebody's pretty spotted pig. It's a ridiculous, ridiculous song. And I think when you've got 16 verses of ridiculousness and you're trying to lay that on a modern audience, I don't think anybody minds if you get rid of some of the particularly repetitive verses. And I think that's probably what happened. I probably just stopped singing some bits where I felt the point had already been made.
Yes, I can tell you did get rid of verse 13 from Child. Not that it helps you particularly at this immediate stage, but there are two stanzas, 12 and 13 in Child, which are there are three things I do demand of thee. It's thy horn and thy hound and thy gay lady. And the next one is, if these three things thou dost demand of me, it's just as my sword and my neck agree.
Yeah. So there is a verse that I do sing that's about, because I love that line. My sword and thy neck shall agree. I think that's a great way of describing. I think Brian said this in the previous part of the episode. That's a great way of describing somebody's execution.
It's like saying, "Allow me to introduce you to my fist," or so. It's one of those sort of
Right,
things.
yeah, like the medieval version of that, right? Absolutely.
But I don't think you do the one before that about there are three things I want of thy horse, thy horn, thy hound, and thy gay lady.
What would be interesting, because you're quoting there from Child, what would be interesting to me, and I could go and do this, but I may not,
That's all right.
is to have a look at whether that full version made it into Roy Palmer's book, because remember, I didn't get it from Child, I got it from Roy Palmer.
Of
So
course, as is one thing I've learnt from talking with Steve Roud, is never trust anything.
yeah,
There's so many levels of censorship.
yeah,
If it's in the Roy Palmer's book, don't trust that. Find out where Roy Palmer got it. Go back to that source. Don't trust that. If it says where that source got it from, don't trust it. Go back to try and find the full source and see what's missing. See what didn't get missed out, or just you find all sorts of things happened in. There's like 4 or 5 levels of censorship going on,
yeah,
and so you're quite
yeah.
right. Of course, I've got Child here, but you could, and then I've got what I think is a set of your words. What I haven't got in front of me is what's in the Roy Palmer book. So we're doing a bit of in-depth nerdery here, and I've edited around this for the listeners, so you don't have to hear us, John going off to his shelves and back and all sorts. But I've shared on my screen for me and John to both see the version that's in Child, and John is just found in his book of Songs of the Midlands the version he got from, which is they got it from Child. We're just going to vaguely compare them to see what may or may not be missing.
So Roy Palmer's version of it is 15 verses long.
And it's 16 in Child, so I wonder which one got rid of.
So let's have a look. I'm going to go through and just think to myself, what do I sing and what did I drop out? So the first verse I definitely sang. The second verse I definitely sang. Third, yes. I seem to have dropped out verse 4 because verse 4 seems to be the hunter saying, "What am I going to do now? I'll have a go on this horn and I'll see what happens." And then the fifth verse is him just
doing it.
So I think I've dropped out him describing what he's about to do.
That's fair enough. There's a lot of that in old Child ballads. There's a lot of repetition and description and things, yeah.
And then the wild boar hears him in his den. I sing that. The wild boar, being so stout and strong, thrashed down the trees as he came along. I don't sing that. And as Brian pointed out yesterday, that's an excellent verse. And so if I ever sing this again, I'm putting that back. I don't know why that drops out.
Or you could localize it. There's, as I said in the first half, there's an American version where instead of just saying the trees, it talks about the ash tree and something else. So the American singer, I can't remember which. I think it's in the Nimrod Workman version. Had actually localized it with the local trees. So you could, trees are local to Bromsgrove. You could find out and actually have the local trees in it.
I could, but I do like that line, as Brian did. He thrashed down the trees as he came along. It's poetic. It's nice.
It is very good, though. Yeah.
They fought for hours for a long summer's day. Yeah, I sing that. Then Sir Rylas drew his broadsword with might and cut his head off quite. I like that line. I always like that line.
He quite cut his head off.
Yeah, on the record, I make a point of that word. He fairly cut his head off quite. The wild woman flew out of nowhere. Pretty spotted pig. Yeah. If these things thou dost demand of me, it's just as my sword and thy neck can agree. So those bits the verses that you've just highlighted about the horn and
so Roy Palmer got rid of the horn and the hound and the gay lady.
They've gone, and I do. This is coming back to me now because I remember looking through this and going, if these 3 things thou dost demand of me, what 3 things is he talking about? Like,
yeah, because they're not there.
They've gone.
She wants his horn, his hound, and his lady.
So there you go. There's a good example of what you were saying about of Steve Roud's advice to you. Never trust Roy Palmer.
Well, don't trust Roy Palmer. Don't trust anyone, I think is more accurate. But
Yeah.
Always look at it from another angle. Does it still work? Is the advice? But you always check where someone got it from.
Yeah. And then into his locks the wild woman flew. Okay. Yeah, and then it's roughly the same, apart from, oh no, you do have it in child. In Bromsgrove Church, they both do lie. I changed that, I think, because I thought it was rubbish.
Well, I don't have a picture of the boar's head.
Yeah, next to it. So I think I must have changed it to, because I sing there was a boar's head on a spike nearby.
Well, Brian said that some versions do have the head on the spike rather than the
Oh well, maybe
rather than the I don't know, the stained glass window of a boar, of a head of a boar or something.
yeah. I don't remember. I mean, this is interesting. I don't remember going and doing very much research on this song because let's be frank, again, this song is called The Jovial Hunter of Bromsgrove and it's absolutely ridiculous. So I wasn't going to spend a huge amount of time going and trying to find better versions of it.
No, that's also fine. Although I on the converse of that, in the inverse of that rather, I do find it satisfying to do a ridiculous amount of research on something that is in itself ridiculous.
Yeah. But that what's interesting to me there is if you're saying that Brian says that there are versions with the boar's head on a spike, I don't know where I got that from.
Okay, right, sure.
So maybe at some point I did hear another version, or maybe it's funny how those things slip out of your head.
Be interesting to go back or maybe it won't be particularly satisfying to go back and read Sir Eglamour of Artois and see how much there is in there.
Yeah, I do remember that he had some amazing names, don't he? There was, he comes up. I mean, Brian will have talked to you about this, but he comes up as Sir Lionel, Bold Sir Rylas, Bangham the Boar Slayer. I like that.
The Nimrod Workman version we heard earlier in the episode is Byler and the Boar.
Yeah,
Biler, Byler.
Sir Egrabal, Sir Eglamour, Racabello,
and the one in Child, the one that's in the one Child entry that is in Bronson was Sir somebody else and Hugh or someone, wasn't it? I can't remember the name of it now. It had not another name. Sir Hugh of something, not Hugh of Lincoln. That's a much later song in the Roud Index. I can't remember.
I seem to remember. I seem to remember. Maybe this is just something that just sort of developed in my stage patter. But I seem to remember when I used to do it that I had done some research looking at the Vaughan Williams Memorial Library website at this song, and being interested that there were quite a lot of collections of this song around the M5 corridor. It was as though the song had originated somewhere in France, hopped over the channel, and then taken the M5 up to near Bromsgrove, where it sort of dropped off and became jovial.
A jovial song, a jovial hunter. Because I did talk about, briefly mention with Brian that one of the old versions didn't have anything to do with jovial in it, but there was two exclamations of the phrase "by Jove," and I wonder what I'm not sure how much of a connection there is, but it seemed quite alarming.
Well, they must by Jove and jovial must be from the same root word, presumably the root word being jovial, and Jove being a shortened version of it.
Yeah, but in terms of why the phrase "by Jove" turns up in a version that doesn't have where the person isn't jovial.
Right.
What's the connection in terms of the songs, how the songs sort of linked up or not?
I don't think I would want a version of this song that wasn't jovial, because I think anybody who's taking this song that seriously needs their head read, really. I mean, to be honest, that's probably why it fell out of my my repertoire. It's not that I'm against jovial songs by any means, but I think you can have too many novelty songs in your set, can't you? And after I had toured this album, I felt that I had one too many novelty songs, and this one could easily be lopped off.
That's fair. That's absolutely fair.
But I do remember that the guitar line that I made for it was quite interesting and challenging, and I used to quite enjoy playing that more as a. So I think I probably saw this song on stage more as a guitar workout to sort of keep me interested than something that I think the audience would find that interesting as a song. Not to say that this song is completely without worth, but
Yeah, that's fair.
but clearly it's not, is it? Because so many people have recorded it, so many people are finding something in this ridiculous song that it stays around, that it hasn't disappeared. It may have dropped out of my repertoire, but it's not dropped out of the general repertoire. People still find something about it that they want to sing.
Indeed, it'll never drop out of the Spies and Bowden repertoire. It's one of their big hits.
Yeah, fair enough, and rightly so. They do a banging version of it.
Well, they do. I mean, that's Bowden finding the version that's in folk songs of the Upper Thames and putting a tune to it, which is a well-known English country dance tune called called something or other. Sometimes called Jacob, other times called. It's got a name that starts with E, like Eduardo or Edmund or something. Dear, oh dear, I should know this. Anyway, it's a well-known folk tune to it, and extra chorusy bits that are very singable, and that's all good, and are much preferable to the things like Cubby Kai Cuddle Dum Kilo Quo Crumb and all that sort of thing, which I'm not a massive fan of.
You don't like your foldy rolls, is that what you're?
Oh no, I like that sort of thing. I just think sometimes there's a step too far.
No, fair enough.
But
That's
then
fair.
my harmony trio and I sing a song that's got ringle dingle ding in it every chorus, so it's fine. It's
I mean, that sounds like something from a 1950s rock and roll song.
ringle dingle ding. Yeah.
Digga digga ding, ring a digga
It's a
digga
tangent we did when Brian Peters was on for the episode on the Elfin Knight,
Oh, you're
child number
mad.
2, the epic episode. We found incredibly, and I sent it to a lot of people. Number 3 in Bronson for that. Has the magnificent refrain lines for a Scots version. I think it's Scots, which goes, I want you to make me a cambric shirt, fummalum link suppaloo my knee, with neither seam or needlework, redio tedio toddle bod bedio, fummalum link suppaloo my knee. And redio tedio toddle bod bedio is absolutely fantastic. I would never sing it anywhere, but I love that, and I always thought that maybe that's where Little Richard got Ready Teddy from.
Nice.
Radio Teddio.
I doubt it, but nice.
Yeah, I highly doubt it as well, but the thought occurred to me, and to no one else at all.
I cannot imagine Little Richard or Chuck Berry or any of them spending a lot of time with Child or anything
Going through
like that.
Bronson or Child, yeah. But no, going back to the Sir Lionel, the version in Bronson with By Jove in it is Old Bangham. It's number 8 in Bronson. I spoke about this with Brian earlier, but the verse 3 has Old Bangham drew his wooden knife, Dillham down. Old Bangham drew his wooden knife and swore by Jove he'd take his life.
Oh.
And then the last verse, Old Bangham, did you win or lose? Dillham down. Old Bangham, did you win or lose? He swore by Jove he'd won the shoes. So the shoes are in there, you see. But it's the By Jove thing caught me, because that version doesn't have anything to do with jovial. He's just Old Bangham.
He was after a nice pair of shoes.
Yeah, but it's the fact that some versions he's a jovial hunter, and in this one the character says By Jove a couple of times. So there must be something there.
By Jove, obviously, it's an expression of surprise, isn't it? It doesn't have to mean. Although I just mentioned that it probably comes from the same root word. I think quite often it's used as an expression of surprise.
Oh, absolutely. I just think that jovial and Jove in reference to this song and variants of this song.
Oh, I get it. I can see why you're hooked on this line.
It's something about it. I just think I need to know how that connected. Was there a version of the Jovial Hunter that did have the By Jove things in it? Does he keep saying By Jove? Is that why he's jovial? Because he keeps saying By Jove.
And you've gone to a level that I'm not going to go there with you.
That's fine. And we've been talking for an hour, so I think I'd better move on as well. Is there anything else you want to say about your version or anything to do with this other than that before we move on to recommended listening recommendations?
No, not really. Only the point that I just made about about why it fell out of my repertoire.
Sure. That's fine. That's fine. Recommended listening then. Always go through some. We recommended some field recordings earlier with Brian, and this half we recommend some revival recordings. So when I say modern recordings, I mean post 1960, I suppose. People.
So I mean, the versions that I quite liked, obviously, Spires and Bowden, as I've just said, is an absolute banger.
Yeah, that came out on an album called Songs in 2005. That's 20 years old, that album now.
Yeah, that's well before my folk life.
That's astonishing. That was, if people don't know, that came out, and shortly after it, an album called Tunes came out, because they were about to go and make an album, but they found they had enough new material for a whole album of songs and a whole album of tunes, which is exactly what they did, and released it. And I have the very first pressing of the album's songs, and I know it's the first pressing because on the spine it says Tunes on it. But if you buy it now, or ever since that second pressing, it says Songs, but the first pressing had Tunes on it. So it's quite a rare one to have. But anyway,
yeah, that must be worth at least £7.50 now. So.
Check Discogs, you never know. But yeah, that's a 2005 album called Songs, which is very good.
Wild Hog in the Woods, Furrow Collective, 2016. I think the album's called Wild Hog, isn't it? Or am I wrong?
It is indeed. The album is called Wild Hog from 2016. Yes, I've had 3 of the 4 Furrow Collective members on the podcast.
Who are you missing?
Lucy Farrell.
Okay.
We had Emily Portman last season for The Demon Lover, and we've had Alistair Roberts this season for The Fair Flower of Northumberland, and we had Rachel Newton for Hind Horn last week. Yeah. And so I'm just missing Lucy Farrell.
You need the full set.
I do.
And then the version that I had forgotten about until I was just looking into it for you, is A.L. Lloyd, Bert Lloyd's version, which reminds me of that the theme tune to that old Robin Hood series, Robin Hood Riding Through the Glen, which I think is absolute. It's not the same song, but it just has that spirit to it, which I think is absolutely right for this song.
That's great. He came to Sherwood Forest with a feather in his cap and all that.
That business, yeah.
I'm well versed in that, having grown up listening to my parents' LPs of Hello Children Everywhere. I'm well versed in that era of popular song.
And seeing as we've done a bit of Beatles geekery, I'm just going to add in absolute complete tangent here that there is a connection between that Robin Hood song and the Beatles. And that connection is that Dick James sang the song Robin Hood Riding Through the Glen, and he was their publisher, who then went on to sell their publishing rights to, I think it was to ABC, somebody's going to correct me on that, who then went on to sell the rights to Michael Jackson, thus stealing half the Beatles collection from under Paul McCartney's nose. And nobody needed to hear that, but there it is anyway.
There we go. The most tangential how you get from Walter Rylas to the Beatles. Al Lloyd sang a version that sounded vaguely like Dick James singing Robin Hood, and excellent, fantastic.
I do sometimes wonder how often I must think about the Beatles in a typical day. But I think
quite a lot for me. I think actually, they're always there. Other versions of this song, though, not by the Beatles, unfortunately. We have, as I mentioned a few times, Waterson Carthy. That's the Raccabello variant, which Martin basically, as I said earlier, he said, with the help of every version I could lay my hands on, a shoehorn, a great tune, and a great band, the song is given full reign. So he did a lot of editing work on that to make it work for him. But it's really fun. I love that version.
Old Bangham, Peggy Seeger. I mean, I'm now looking at versions that I don't know, but I put a playlist together a long time ago of versions of this. And so yes, Old Bangham, Peggy Seeger, Quill O'Quay by Kieran Means. I don't know if that's got into this playlist by accident or whether it's...
No, I think that's part of it. Quill O'Quay, that sounds like one of the refrain lines. That's on a Kieran Means solo album, but it's him and his mother, Sarah Gray.
Okay. Sir Lionel and the Boar by the Demon Barbers.
That's right. I was going to come to that one. That's one of those disco versions. The Demon Barbers, that's their album from 2015 called Disco at the Tavern. And Bryony Griffith sings the lead vocal on that one.
I've written down here that I wrote an article about this song years ago, which is on my website, but I've got written down here that the Demon Barber's version is reggae, but
Oh, okay.
uh,
I sit
uh,
corrected.
I haven't listened to it recently enough to be able to confirm whether or not that's true.
That's fine.
And then I also have down here that Nine Barrow did a version of Bold Sir Rylas as well.
Yeah, they just. I mean, not to disparage them, they're very good. They when I say they just learnt the Spies and Bowden one, I mean they learnt the Spies and Bowden one. There's nothing just about it. They sing the one from Spies and Bowden, which I'm sure John's very happy about. The idea that someone's learning stuff from him.
Yeah,
So we all want people to learn stuff from us, so it's fine. Other versions, I've got 4 other ones I'll just briefly mention before we wrap things up because we've been talking for quite a while. Kate Rusby sang this on an album in 1997 called Hourglass. And that's track 1. It's Sir Eglamour, and it in fact is the version from Volume 3 of Thomas Durfee's Pills to Purge Melancholy.
well, we've all been looking for it.
Yeah, so I've got it on my shelf over there, Pills to Purge. And yes, I don't think it's exactly that version. I think she did a bit of tweaking with some of the words, but it has got the one in Pills about Fala, Lanky Down Dilly, and all that stuff, which is very good. Michael Angelo is a trio not many people have heard of. That's a short-lived trio from the 1990s made up of Mike Waterson, his wife Anne Waterson, and an excellent singer called Jill Pidd, who was briefly in the Watersons during the 90s for a couple of America tours. Jill Pidd is the partner of Doc Rowe, the well-known folk archivist. They had a short-lived unaccompanied harmony trio, and there's no official recordings out there, but last year, in order to raise money for charity, Jill put together a CD of cassette recordings from their rehearsals. And so Mike Waterson, Anne Waterson, and Jill Pidd, Michael and Gillo is the name of the trio, which is fantastic.
Very clever. It's very clever, isn't it?
Yeah. And they did it, and that's called Sir Lionel, but it's one of those He Was a Jovial Hunter versions in a minor key.
Oh, yeah.
So that's a good one. The CD is available, constantly raising money for charity. It's very, very good. If you're a Mike Waterson completist, you haven't got that one. So everyone should order that one. And then 2 versions, which I think I'm not had a chance to dissect them to see if they are exactly the same version. But I came across past podcast guest John Looms, who was on in season 2 for the Three Butchers. He had a 2005 album called Fearful Symmetry. And on there is Wild Boar. And I listened to a bit of that the other day, and it reminded, in the dim, sort of distant recesses of my brain, reminded me of Jim Moray. And as John Wilks here joined the Zoom room, I was frantically scouring the internet trying to find Jim Moray's version of the Wild Boar. Turns out it's not on an official album. There's a YouTube video of him and a couple of people performing it. And I think it's on a bonus disc for some versions of Jim Moray's album In Modern History. That's the Wild Boar. And that's got the He Was a Jovial Hunter line. I can't remember the first line, but it's dum da ba da di dun dun da, and he was a jovial hunter. It's one of those sort of ones, if that helps at all. But yeah, Jim Moray and John Looms as well, fantastic. I will put links to all of those or as many of them as I could find, in the show notes. Right, I think we better draw things to a close, lest other people get bored of listening to the two of us waffle on and inevitably come back to the Beatles. It seems to have happened a few times. Yeah.
No, I'm done with them now. I'm done with them.
Well, the Beatles, never.
I've thought about them too much today already. Time to think about something else.
Well, thank you ever so much for coming on and doing this. It's been great to actually sit down and chat with you because of lockdowns, but then also because of our geographical locations in the world, in the country. We don't get a chance to actually see each other in person as much as I would like, at least. But it's always nice to
Absolutely.
Oh, it's nice to have a chat and a natter with you about stuff and about very nerdy comparing the theme song from Child and Roy Palmer was good fun, at least for us. I hope other people got something out of it as well. So this episode goes out on the 9th of April. So from the 9th of April, what have you got coming up? Any projects or gigs you want to give a shout out to and a plug?
Oh, yes. So let's see. April the 11th, I am at Burton Folk Club, Burton-on-Trent Folk Club. And then on April 12th, I am at the Treehouse Bookshop in Kenilworth. Then jumping forwards a little bit, I'm running the second Whitchurch Folk Festival on May the 10th.
Oh yes, that's right. My Culverake colleague Seb Stone is involved in that, isn't he? He's booked there.
He's coming down for that. Yeah,
Excellent.
So that's happening, and then I'm playing in Chester in May as well, and in
is that at the festival?
No, it's at Soundbox.
Oh yes, I know that.
So I'm playing there in May, and also at Bradninch Folk Club in Exeter around that time. And not today, tomorrow, but in the past, because you're releasing this on the 9th, 4th of April, I have a new single out, and that's part of a new album that I have mostly recorded with young Joe Sartin producing, Paul Stone. And that's got a Kickstarter running at the moment. So if people want to hear any more of me blathering on musically, then they can help me with the Kickstarter.
When's the Kickstarter deadline? When's the deadline for that?
The Kickstarter deadline will be probably a few days after this goes out, maybe around the 15th, I think. And if you can put the link, that would be great. But
I will, absolutely.
Thank you. People can also find the information about that on my website, which is johnwilks.online. John Wilks spelled JONWILKS, not the guy who murdered the president. That's the other spelling. So
indeed it is. Thank you for clarifying. Yeah, I'll definitely put a link to the Kickstarter in the episode notes, so people can find that. And we'll leave that there, and I'm sure we'll bump into each other at some point over the summer, maybe, or at a future thing.
Yeah, well, you're always at Sidmouth, aren't you?
I'm always at Sidmouth Folk Week. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm playing this year at Sidmouth.
Oh, are you? Oh, good, excellent. Yeah, I am 35. This will make you feel weird. I'm 35 years old, and this year will be my 34th Sidmouth Folk Festival, I think.
I mean, I think that in some ways that's impressive. In some ways, surely there's other things that you could be doing.
Is there nowhere else I could have gone on the first week of August every year? The answer is no. No, it's just been a staple my entire life. My dad was always booked there as a performer, so even when I was a kid, my mum and I would go along and it would be a holiday. And then I started playing, and I was always involved in one respect or another. So yeah, it's been. I missed one Sidmouth, which was the one time when they did it, the first one after lockdown, when it was all in the Blackmore Gardens, that single field version.
Oh yes.
I didn't go then because I didn't feel it was worth going all the way for it. And as soon as I wasn't there and everyone else was, I got very second homesick, if you see what I mean. I got very sad that I wasn't there, so I've only missed one Sidmouth Folk Week.
Well, I'm also doing a thing with Charlie Cooper there. I don't know if you know Charlie Cooper.
Name rings a bell.
He was in This Country. He played Curtin in This Country.
Yeah, okay.
And he did a series recently on British folklore myths called Myth Country. And we're doing a Q&A at Sidmouth, I believe. I don't know if I'm supposed to have said that, but there you go. I've said it. So
there we go. I'm sure it's fine. Lovely. Oh well, I'll definitely see you at Sidmouth then.
All right.
That'll be good. Okay. But in the meantime, though, John Wilks, thank you very much.
Quinn, you're welcome.
Sir Robert Bolton had 3 sons. Wind well thy horn, good hunter, and one of them Sir Rylas. Well, he was a jovial hunter, and he's ranged all round the woodside. Wind well thy horn, good hunter, until a tree top well a lady he's spied. for he was a jovial hunter. Now what's thou mean, fair lady? Wind well that horn, good hunter. Well, the wildest boar has killed my lord, and thou art a jovial hunter. So he's put his horn all in his mouth. Wind well that horn, good hunter, and he's blowed north, east, and west, and south, did Rylas the jovial hunter. And the wild boars heard him in his den. Wind well thy horn, good hunter, and he's made the best of speed to him, to Rylas the jovial hunter. And they fought 4 hours in a long summer's day. Wind well thy horn, good hunter, till the wild boar fain would have gotten away from Rylas the jovial hunter. So Rylas drew his sword with might. Wind well that horn, good hunter, and he's fairly cut his head off quite, did Rylas the jovial hunter. Then from the woods a wild woman flew. Wind well that horn, good hunter, saying, my pretty spotted pig, well thou hast slew, and thou art a jovial hunter. If there's one thing I demand of thee, wind well thy horn, good hunter, that it's my sword and thy neck they shall agree, says Rylas the jovial hunter. So Rylas drew his sword again. Wind well thy horn, good hunter, and he's fairly cut her head in twain, did Rylas the jovial hunter. Now in Bromsgrove church they both do lie. Wind well thy horn, good hunter, with the boar's head on a spike nearby, to Rylas the jovial hunter.
That was John Wilks singing The Jovial Hunter of Bromsgrove. And that brings us to the end of this episode. What did you think? What are your thoughts on the song? I'd love to hear from you. Are you a jovial person? If you'd like to get in touch with me, feel free to drop me an email at intherowd@singyonder.co.uk or visit the podcast on various social media platforms. We're on Facebook, X, Instagram, Threads and Blue Sky. Just search for In the Roud, a folk song podcast. If you're enjoying the podcast, I would very much appreciate it if you would give us a little rating and review on wherever you get your podcasts from. On places like Apple Music, that's a star rating out of 5 and a little review as well you can write. Takes less than a minute. It's really appreciated. And on YouTube and places like that, there's the like button, and you can subscribe and you can write comments, that sort of thing. It all really helps to bring the podcast to reach a wider audience. If you feel so moved to support the podcast financially, then please do head on over to patreon.com/intherowd. There you can sign up for either £5 or £10 per month and receive weekly bonus content. Even if you don't want to hear the bonus content, that's the place to support the podcast. We're currently in a brief break on the Patreon while I get on with sorting out the next batch of episodes. But there's a decent amount of back catalogue to enjoy though. We've got Singer's Choice mini-seasons, so 3 songs and episodes from each of Nancy Kerr, Mossy Christian and Rachel McShane. A Wassail episode with Jackie Oates, plus spotlight episodes on Sabin Baring-Gould, Emma Dusenbury, song collecting in the region of Devon, and the subject of broadsides too. All this on patreon.com/intherowd. In the Roud is a media partner of Veteran, the traditional music label. Although this week's song doesn't currently feature on any of their releases, you can find details of their extensive catalogue on their website, veteran.co.uk. One last huge thanks to this week's guests, Brian Peters and John Wilks. Join me next week for episode 10, the final episode of this season. We'll be looking at Roud 30, which is child ballad number 25. That's the song Willie's Like Wake, aka The Blue Flowers and the Yellow. On the history side, I will be joined by a brand new contributor, Steve Byrne, and my singer guest will be Bryony Griffith. Until then, that's it from me. Stay safe, be well, and I'll see you next time in the Roud.
Courage crowned with conquest, or a brief relation how that valiant knight and heroic champion Sir Eglamour bravely fought with and manfully slew a terrible, huge, great, monstrous dragon.